The Grand Hall of the Wadi Royal Palace erupts into chaos as human diplomat Mark Green is caught in a compromising position with Princess Flora, the king's daughter, during a critical peace negotiation. King Zorn bursts through the ornate double doors, his face contorted with rage. His eyes bulge at the sight before him. Mark and Flora locked in an intimate embrace atop the intricate negotiating table. Ambassador Sarah Chen's jaw drops. The human delegation watches in horror as armed Wadi guards surround the entangled couple. Mark scrambles to cover himself, while Flora's iridescent skin flushes a deep violet. "Seize them," King Zorn bellows, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "This human has defiled my daughter and insulted our people. He will be executed immediately." Ambassador Chen steps forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Your Majesty, please. Mark has diplomatic immunity. We must consider the peace talks." "Silence," King Zorn roars, cutting her off. "Guards, detain the entire human delegation. These talks are over." Princess Flora, her delicate antennae quivering, rushes to her father's side. "Father, please, you don't understand. Mark and we've been together for months. I love him." The revelation sends fresh waves of shock through the assembly. King Zorn's face darkens further, his anger palpable in the air. As Wadi guards close in, Mark notices several nobles exchanging furtive glances. Something doesn't add up. His eyes narrow, mind racing despite his compromising position. Major John Hawkins, head of the human security detail, moves swiftly. He positions himself between Ambassador Chen and the approaching Wadi guards, hand hovering near his concealed weapon. "Ambassador, we need to move." "Now," Hawkins mutters urgently. Mark finds himself torn from Flora's arms. He struggles against the iron grip of the Wadi guards, still only half-dressed. "Flora," he calls out, watching helplessly as she's restrained by her own people. The Grand Hall, once a symbol of potential peace between Earth and Xarxus, now stands as a testament to chaos. The carefully orchestrated negotiations, meant to forge a crucial military alliance against the encroaching Akamarian Empire, lie in tatters. As Mark is dragged towards the palace dungeons, a flicker of movement catches his eye. A Wadi official slips away from the commotion, clutching what appears to be Earth's classified negotiation documents. Mark's blood runs cold. This is bigger than a mere scandal. The corridors echo with shouts and the heavy footfalls of guards. Mark's mind races. How did a moment of passion spiral into this? The fate of interstellar peace now hangs by a thread, all because he couldn't resist the allure of an alien princess. As the dungeon doors loom before him, Mark realizes the true gravity of the situation. This isn't just about him anymore. The security of Earth itself may now be at stake, all because of his ill-timed liaison. The question now is, can he find a way to salvage the situation before it's too late? The dungeon doors loom before Mark, their iron-wrought surface a stark reminder of his predicament. As the guards roughly shoved him forward, a sudden explosion rocked the palace, causing the very foundations to shudder. The Wadi guards stumbled, their grip on Mark loosening for a crucial moment. Taking advantage of the chaos, Mark twisted free and darted down a side corridor. Shouts and the pounding of feet echoed behind him as he navigated the labyrinthine halls of the palace's lower levels. His heart raced, not just from exertion, but from the realization that this was more than a simple misunderstanding. As he ran, Mark's eyes darted to the walls, noticing sleek, unfamiliar devices integrated into the Wadi security systems. The technology bore the unmistakable hallmarks of Akamarian design, a chilling confirmation of his earlier suspicions. He filed this information away, knowing it could be crucial in unraveling the larger conspiracy at play. Meanwhile, in the Grand Hall, Ambassador Sarah Chen seized the moment of confusion to approach King Zorn. The monarch's face was a mask of fury and bewilderment as he barked orders to his guards, trying to restore order amidst the chaos. "Your Majesty," Chen called out, her voice cutting through the din, "I implore you to reconsider your actions. The situation is far more complex than it appears." King Zorn's gaze snapped to her, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, Ambassador? Speak quickly." Chen took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. We have intelligence suggesting the Akamarian Empire is expanding aggressively in this sector. The alliance between Earth and Xarxis is crucial to maintaining stability. This incident may be part of a larger plot to undermine our negotiations. The king's antennae twitched, a sign of deep contemplation in Wadi body language. Before he could respond, a breathless aide burst into the hall. "Your Majesty, there are reports of intruders throughout the palace." As chaos continued to unfold in the Grand Hall, Princess Flora raced through the palace's hidden passages. Her heart pounded in her chest as she recalled the conversation she had overheard. Vexor, her father's most trusted advisor, a traitor? The thought made her feel ill, but she pushed aside her emotions. Mark needed her. She emerged from a concealed door just as Mark rounded a corner, nearly colliding with her. His eyes widened in surprise and relief. "Flora, what's going on?" Flora grabbed his arm, pulling him into the secret passage. "There's no time to explain everything. My father's advisor, Vexor, is working with the Akamarians. He's trying to sabotage the alliance between our peoples." Mark's mind raced, connecting the dots. "That explains the Akamarian tech I saw in the security systems. But why? What do they gain from this?" As they hurried through the dim corridor, Flora's voice was grim. "Control of the sector, most likely. With Earth and Xarxis at odds, the Akamarians could easily expand their influence." Their conversation was cut short as they rounded a bend and came face to face with Major Hawkins and his team. Weapons were raised for a tense moment before recognition set in. "Green, Princess," Hawkins lowered his weapon. "Glad we found you. The situation's gone to hell out there." Mark quickly filled Hawkins in on what they had learned. The Major's expression darkened. "This is worse than we thought. We need to get this information to Ambassador Chen and your father, Princess." Flora nodded, her antennae quivering with perseverance. "I know a way to the Grand Hall that should avoid the main corridors. Follow me." As they made their way through the palace's hidden arteries, Mark found himself shoulder to shoulder with Flora. Despite the gravity of the situation, he couldn't help but feel a flutter in his chest at her proximity. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Flora," he whispered, "I'm sorry about earlier. I never meant to cause so much trouble." She turned to him, her iridescent skin shimmering in the low light. "Mark, we both share responsibility for what happened, but now we have a chance to make it right and save both our peoples." Their moment was interrupted as Hawkins held up a hand, signaling for silence. Ahead, voices drifted through a thin section of wall. The group pressed close, straining to listen. "The humans must not be allowed to leave," came Vexor's unmistakable voice. "Once King Zorn signs the treaty with the Akamarian ambassador, we can dispose of them quietly." A cold, unfamiliar voice responded, "Excellent. The Empire will reward you handsomely for your service, Vexor. Soon this entire sector will be under Akamarian control." Flora's grip on Mark's arm tightened, her eyes wide with shock and anger. Hawkins motioned for the group to move on, his face set in fierce dedication. As they neared the entrance to the Grand Hall, the sounds of argument could be heard. Ambassador Chen's voice rang out, clear and persuasive, as she continued to plead their case to King Zorn. Hawkins turned to the group. "All right, here's the plan. Princess, you and Green will enter first. Your presence should buy us enough time to secure the room. My team will follow, covering the exits. We need to expose Vexor and present our evidence before he can enact his plan." Mark met Flora's gaze, seeing his own mix of fear and willpower mirrored in her alien eyes. With a nod to each other, they stepped forward, ready to face whatever awaited them in the Grand Hall. As Flora's hand reached for the hidden latch, Mark steeled himself for the confrontation to come. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and the next few moments would determine whether peace or war would reign in the galaxy. As Flora's hand pressed against the hidden latch, the panel slid open silently. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. But before they could step into the Grand Hall, Major Hawkins placed a firm hand on Mark's shoulder. "Wait," Hawkins whispered, his eyes scanning the group. "We need to split up. Cover more ground." Mark nodded, understanding the logic. "What's the plan?" Hawkins quickly outlined their strategy. Green, you and the princess will infiltrate Vexor's private chambers. Search for any incriminating documents or evidence of his treachery. My team and I will track down those classified Earth documents and investigate the Acamarian tech integration. Flora's antennae twitched with persistence. I know a shortcut to Vexor's quarters. We can avoid the main corridors. With a final nod to Hawkins, Mark and Flora set off down a narrow, hidden passage. The close confines forced them to move in single file, their bodies occasionally brushing against each other in the dim light. Mark couldn't help but recall their earlier encounter, the memory sending a jolt of electricity through his body. As they neared Vexor's chambers, voices echoed from around a corner. Mark instinctively pulled Flora into an alcove, their bodies pressing together in the tight space. They held their breath as two wadi guards passed by, oblivious to their presence. That was close, Mark whispered, acutely aware of Flora's warmth against him. Flora's eyes met his, a mix of adrenaline and something deeper swirling in their alien depths. We make a good team, she murmured. Shaking off the distraction, they continued their journey. Upon reaching Vexor's chambers, Mark examined the security panel guarding the entrance. It was a complex blend of Wadi and Acamarian technology, but nothing he couldn't handle. Give me a minute, he muttered, pulling out a small device from his pocket. His fingers flew over the interface, bypassing security protocols and overriding failsafes. With a soft click, the door slid open. Inside, the chamber was a testament to Vexor's opulence and taste for the exotic. Mark and Flora moved efficiently, searching for anything out of place. It was Flora who discovered the hidden compartment, her sensitive antennae detecting a slight disruption in the wall's energy field. Mark, over here, she called softly. Together, they managed to open the compartment, revealing a sleek, alien device. As Mark reached for it, his hand accidentally brushed against a sensor. Suddenly, a holographic image flickered to life, filling the room with an eerie blue glow. The face of an Acamarian military commander materialized before them, its tentacled visage contorted in a grotesque approximation of a smile. Vexor, the creature hissed, the time has come. With the human-Xarxis alliance in shambles, our invasion fleet stands ready. We will strike at dawn, using the chaos of the failed peace talks as our cover. Xarxis will fall, and the sector will be ours. The message faded, leaving Mark and Flora in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. A full-scale Acamarian invasion was imminent. We have to warn my father, Flora said, her voice tight with urgency. Before Mark could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps sent them into a panic. With nowhere else to hide, they dove into a nearby closet, pulling the door shut just as the chamber's main entrance opened. Pressed together in the darkness, Mark could feel Flora's rapid heartbeats against his chest. Her breath tickled his neck as they strained to listen to the conversation outside. Vexor's voice drifted through the thin door. The plan is proceeding perfectly. King Zorn is blinded by his anger, and the humans are in disarray. By this time tomorrow, Xarxis will be under Acamarian protection, and we will be richly rewarded for our loyalty. Another voice, one Mark didn't recognize, replied, And what of the human diplomat and the princess? Their indiscretion was not part of the plan. Vexor chuckled darkly. A fortunate accident. It provided the perfect catalyst for our final move. Once the invasion begins, they will be among the first casualties, a tragic loss in the fog of war. Mark felt Flora tense against him, her fingers digging into his arms. He instinctively tightened his embrace, offering what comfort he could in their confined space. The conversation outside continued, detailing the extent of the conspiracy and the nobles involved. Mark committed every name to memory, knowing each piece of information could be crucial in unraveling the plot. Suddenly, the closet door began to open. Mark's heart leapt into his throat as he prepared for the worst. But before Vexor could fully reveal their hiding place, an alarm blared throughout the palace. What now? Vexor snarled, slamming the closet door shut and rushing from the room. Mark and Flora waited a beat before tumbling out of their hiding spot. That has to be Hawkins, Mark said, gathering the Acamarian device and any other evidence they could find. We need to move. They slipped out of Vexor's chambers, only to find the corridors in chaos. Guards rushed past, shouting orders and responding to the alarm. In the confusion, Mark and Flora were nearly spotted by a group of Wadi soldiers. Without warning, Flora grabbed Mark and pulled him into a passionate embrace. She pressed her lips against his, her body molding to his form. The guards, upon seeing what appeared to be a secret tryst, quickly averted their eyes and hurried past. As the footsteps faded, Flora pulled back. Her skin flushed a deep violet. "Quick thinking," Mark murmured, his heart racing from more than just the close call. "We should go," Flora said, her voice husky. "Hawkins will be waiting." They set off through the palace's winding corridors, dodging patrols and using every secret passage Flora knew. The evidence of Vexor's treachery burdened immensely in Mark's pocket, a constant reminder of the urgency of their mission. As they neared the rendezvous point, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, his instincts screaming that danger was closing in. "Flora," he whispered, pulling her close as they paused at an intersection. "I think Vexor knows we were in his chambers. We need to be extra careful." Flora nodded, her antennae twitching as she scanned their surroundings. "We're almost there. Just a little further." They pressed on, unaware that Vexor had indeed discovered their intrusion and set plans in motion to silence them permanently. The race to expose the truth and prevent an interstellar war had begun in earnest, with the fate of Earth, Xarxus, and the entire sector hanging precariously in the balance. As they rounded the final corner, Mark's instincts proved correct. A group of Wadi nobles, their faces contorted with anger, blocked their path. "Halt!" one of them shouted, raising a weapon. "By order of Vexor, you are to be detained." Mark grabbed Flora's hand, pulling her back the way they came. "This way," he hissed, his mind racing to find an alternate route. Flora's antennae twitched as she processed their options. "The conservatory," she whispered. "It's not far, and we can lose them in there." They sprinted down a side corridor, the shouts of their pursuers echoing behind them. Flora led the way, her knowledge of the palace layout proving invaluable. As they burst through the ornate doors of the conservatory, Mark's eyes widened at the sight before him. The vast chamber was a riot of alien flora, filled with plants of every imaginable shape and color. Massive fronds swayed overhead, while delicate tendrils crept along the ground. The air was thick with exotic scents and spores, creating a dreamlike atmosphere. "Stay close," Flora warned, guiding Mark along a narrow path. "Some of these plants are carnivorous." As if on cue, a nearby vine lashed out, its thorny appendage barely missing Mark's arm. He stumbled back, bumping into Flora. The contact sent a jolt through his body, reminding him of their earlier closeness. They pressed on, ducking under low-hanging branches and skirting around pools of bubbling liquid. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they delved deeper into the botanical maze. Suddenly, Flora pulled Mark into a secluded alcove. They found themselves surrounded by a cluster of bioluminescent flowers, their petals pulsing with soft, ethereal light. "We should be safe here for a moment," Flora said, her breath coming in short gasps. Mark nodded, acutely aware of their proximity in the tight space. The adrenaline of their escape, combined with the intoxicating sense of the conservatory, left him feeling lightheaded. He looked at Flora, her iridescent skin shimmering in the glow of the alien flowers. Their eyes met, and for a moment the urgency of their mission faded away. The tension between them, simmering since their earlier encounter, finally boiled over. Mark leaned in, his lips meeting Flora's in a passionate kiss. The bioluminescent flowers around them flared brightly, reacting to their body heat. As they embraced, lost in the moment, neither noticed the subtle change in the air around them. The flowers released a fine mist of pheromones, triggered by the couple's passionate encounter. When they finally broke apart, both were flushed and breathing heavily. The reality of their situation came crashing back, but something felt different. The air seemed charged with an electric energy. "We should keep moving," Mark said, his voice husky. As they emerged from their hiding spot, they noticed a change in the conservatory. The plants seemed more active, their movements more pronounced. Unbeknownst to them, The pheromones released by their encounter were spreading rapidly throughout the palace. They made their way towards the exit, using the heightened plant activity to their advantage. Mark deliberately brushed against clusters of the bioluminescent flowers, triggering more pheromone releases to cover their tracks. As they neared the conservatory's entrance, voices drifted towards them. Two Wadi nobles, their faces flushed and expressions unguarded, were engaged in animated conversation. "It's madness," one of them exclaimed. "The Akamarians will be here at dawn. How can Vexor think he can control them once they've invaded?" The other noble shook his head. "He's promised us power and wealth beyond our wildest dreams, but I fear we've made a terrible mistake." Mark's eyes widened. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small recording device hidden in his diplomatic credentials. He activated it, capturing the noble's incriminating conversation. As the nobles moved on, Mark and Flora shared a look of triumph. This recorded confession, combined with the evidence they had already gathered, would be crucial in exposing Vexor's treachery. They slipped out of the conservatory, making their way towards the rendezvous point. The palace corridors were in chaos, with guards and staff alike acting strangely. Some were engaged in heated arguments, while others seemed lost in daydreams. The pheromones were taking their toll, lowering inhibitions and intensifying emotions throughout the palace. Finally, they reached the designated meeting spot. Major Hawkins and his team were already there, looking slightly disheveled but alert. "Green, Princess," Hawkins greeted them, his eyes darting around warily. "Glad you made it. Things have gone to hell out there." Mark quickly filled Hawkins in on what they had discovered, presenting the Akamarian communication device and the recorded confession. In turn, Hawkins revealed that they had secured the classified Earth documents. "We have everything we need to expose Vexor," Flora said, her antennae quivering with excitement. "We must get to my father immediately." As they prepared to move out, the palace's alarm system blared to life. Red lights flashed, and a mechanical voice announced a complete lockdown. "Vexor," Mark growled. "He must know we're onto him." Hawkins checked his weapon. "We need to move fast. If we can't get to the king, this will all be for nothing." The group set off, their path to King Zorn's chambers now a perilous gauntlet. Vexor's loyal forces were closing in, and time was running out. As they raced through the palace, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that their next move would determine not just their fate, but the fate of Earth, Xarxis, and the entire sector. As they turned another corner, the scene before them stopped them in their tracks. A group of Wadi guards, clearly affected by the conservatory's pheromones, were engaged in a tangle of limbs and tentacles. Some were locked in passionate embraces, while others swayed dreamily, their usual stoic demeanor completely forgotten. "What in the name of—" Hawkins muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Flora's antennae twitched rapidly. "The conservatory flowers," she whispered. "Their pheromones must have spread throughout the palace." Mark felt a wave of heat wash over him, his earlier kiss with Flora flashing vividly in his mind. He shook his head, trying to focus. "We can use this to our advantage," he said, his voice strained. "They're too distracted to notice us." The team carefully navigated around the amorous guards, their progress both hindered and aided by the chaos. As they moved deeper into the palace, Mark noticed the effects of the pheromones intensifying. Flora's skin seemed to shimmer more vibrantly, and he found himself acutely aware of her every movement. Hawkins and his team weren't faring much better. Their movements became less coordinated, and their usually sharp focus began to waver. Mark watched as one of Hawkins' men walked straight into a decorative column, too busy staring at his fellow soldier to pay attention to his surroundings. As they approached a junction in the corridor, a familiar figure emerged from a nearby laboratory. Dr. Xelna, the palace's chief scientist, took in the scene before her with a mixture of fascination and concern. "Princess Flora," she called out, her multifaceted eyes darting between the members of the group. "What's happening? I've been receiving reports of strange behavior throughout the palace." Flora quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out in a rush. Dr. Zelna's eyes widened as she processed the information. "A pheromone exposure of this magnitude? Fascinating," she mused. Then, snapping back to the urgency of the moment, she reached into her lab coat. I believe I can help. I've been working on a compound that might counteract these effects. With practiced efficiency, Dr. Selna withdrew a series of small vials from her portable lab kit. She quickly mixed the contents, creating a pale blue solution. This should provide temporary relief from the pheromones' influence, she explained, administering the antidote to each member of the group. As the compound took effect, Mark felt his head clear. The fog of desire that had been clouding his thoughts dissipated, leaving him sharply focused on their mission once more. He saw similar changes in the others, their postures straightening and eyes regaining their alertness. Thank you, Dr. Xelna, Flora said, her voice steady once more. We must reach my father immediately. The fate of our world depends on it. Just as they were about to continue their journey, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Mark clutched his head, a sudden wave of disorientation and pain washing over him. Around him he saw the others reacting similarly, with Hawkins and his team dropping to their knees. What's happening? Mark gritted out, fighting to stay upright. Flora, though clearly affected, seemed to be faring better than the rest. It's some kind of signal, she gasped, her antennae vibrating erratically. We need to find cover. Through the haze of pain, Mark spotted a maintenance hatch in the wall. There, he pointed, struggling to form the words. That shaft might shield us. With Flora's help, the group crawled into the narrow passage. As soon as the hatch closed behind them, the debilitating effects of the signal lessened. They could still hear it, a constant whine in the background, but its impact was greatly reduced. Vexor, Hawkins spat, his face contorted with anger and residual pain. This has to be his doing. As they caught their breath in the cramped space, voices drifted to them from the other side of the wall. Two of Vexor's guards were speaking in hushed tones. The traitor's going to eliminate the king himself, one said. With the humans incapacitated, he'll blame them for the assassination. The Acamarians will have their excuse to invade. Mark's blood ran cold. They had even less time than they'd thought. We need to split up, Hawkins decided, his tactical mind quickly formulating a plan. My team and I will head to the central control room. We'll disable that infernal device. Green, you and Princess Flora get to the king. Warn him and present your evidence. With grim nods of agreement, the group prepared to separate. As Hawkins and his team crawled towards a different section of the maintenance shaft, Mark and Flora continued on their path to the royal quarters. They emerged from the shaft into a quieter part of the palace. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with a slender, waddy female who bore a striking resemblance to Flora. Lyria, Flora exclaimed, recognizing her younger sister. Princess Lyria's eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of Flora and Mark together. What are you doing with him? She hissed, clearly aware of the earlier incident that had thrown the palace into chaos. Lyria, please, Flora pleaded, her voice urgent. There's no time to explain everything. Father is in danger. We have proof of Vexor's treachery, but we need to reach him immediately. Lyria hesitated, her gaze flicking between her sister and Mark. Finally, she nodded. There's a secret passage to Father's private study. Follow me. As they hurried through hidden corridors, Mark's mind raced. They were so close to their goal, but Vexor's assassins could already be closing in on the king. Every second counted. Finally, they reached a panel that Lyria quickly activated, revealing a hidden door. As it slid open, they found themselves in King Zorn's opulent study. The king himself stood behind his desk, engaged in a heated discussion with Ambassador Chen. Both men turned as Mark, Flora, and Lyria burst into the room. King Zorn's face darkened as he saw Mark, clearly remembering the diplomatic incident from earlier. What is the meaning of this intrusion? The king demanded, his voice thunderous. Before anyone could respond, the main doors to the study flew open. Vexor strode in, flanked by several armed guards. His eyes gleamed with malicious triumph as he took in the scene before him. Your Majesty, Vexor's voice oozed false concern. I've uncovered a plot against your life. The humans and their conspirators were planning to assassinate you and blame it on the Acamarians. The room erupted into chaos as accusations flew. Mark found himself staring down the barrels of several waddy weapons, the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. He knew that his next words could determine not only his own future, but the future of Earth-Zarxis relations and the peace of the entire sector. As tension filled the air, Mark's hand closed around the evidence in his pocket. He had one chance to expose the truth and prevent an interstellar war. With a deep breath, he prepared to make his case, knowing that the next few moments would shape the destiny of multiple worlds. With a swift motion, Mark pulled out the Acamarian communication device from his pocket and activated it. A holographic message flickered to life, filling the room with an eerie blue glow. The unmistakable voice of an Acamarian commander filled the air, detailing plans for the invasion of Zarxis. The room fell silent as the implications of this revelation sank in. King Zorn's face paled, his earlier anger replaced by shock and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Vexor's composure cracked, his eyes darting between the hologram and the king. "Your Majesty, I can explain." But Mark wasn't finished. He produced the recording device, playing back the conversation they had overheard in the conservatory. The nobles' voices echoed through the study, their words damning Vexor beyond doubt. "Lies," Vexor shouted, his facade crumbling. "These humans have fabricated this evidence." King Zorn's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on his once trusted advisor. "The evidence seems quite real, Vexor. What do you have to say for yourself?" Realizing his plot was unraveling, Vexor made a desperate lunge for the door. In a surprising display of agility, Ambassador Chen sprang into action. She tackled Vexor, her slight frame belying her strength as she pinned him to the ground. The room erupted into chaos. Guards loyal to the king moved to secure Vexor, while his own men hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. King Zorn rose from his seat, his voice thunderous. "Arrest Vexor and his co-conspirators immediately. I want every—" His words were cut short as a high-pitched whine filled the air, intensifying rapidly. The Acamarian signal emitter, still active elsewhere in the palace, had increased in power. King Zorn clutched his head, collapsing to his knees in agony. Mark gritted his teeth, fighting through the pain. He saw Flora beside him, her antennae vibrating wildly, but her posture more stable than the others. An idea formed in his mind. "Flora!" he gasped, reaching for her hand. "The signal. We need to stop it. The control room." Flora nodded, understanding immediately. "We must hurry. Father and the others won't last long under this assault." Ambassador Chen, still grappling with Vexor, looked up at them. "Go!" she shouted. "I'll handle things here." As they prepared to leave, Princess Lyria stepped forward. "I'll stay and protect Father," she said, her voice strained but determined. Mark and Flora shared a quick glance before racing out of the study. The corridors were filled with Wadi and humans alike, all writhing in pain from the Acamarian signal. They navigated the chaos, supporting each other as waves of disorientation threatened to overwhelm them. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a group of Vexor's loyalists, protected by personal shields similar to their leaders. Mark and Flora worked in tandem, their movements synchronized as if they had fought side by side for years. Flora used her knowledge of Wadi pressure points to incapacitate one guard, while Mark employed a series of quick jabs to disarm another. They moved with fluid grace, each anticipating the other's actions. As they neared the central control room, they ran into Major Hawkins and his team. The soldiers looked battered but determined. "Green!" Hawkins shouted over the din. "We've located the device, but the control room is heavily fortified. We can't breach it." Mark's mind raced, recalling their experience in the conservatory. "The plants," he said, an idea forming. "We can use the pheromone-producing flowers as a distraction." Working quickly, they fashioned a makeshift smoke bomb using the conservatory plants. When detonated, it filled the area around the control room with a potent cloud of pheromones. The effect on the Wadi guards was immediate. Some fell into each other's arms, while others swayed dreamily, their focus completely shattered. Taking advantage of the confusion, Mark, Flora, and Ambassador Chen slipped into the control room. Inside, they found themselves face-to-face with a group of Acamarian operatives overseeing the signal emitter. A fierce hand-to-hand combat ensued. Mark and Flora moved as one, their earlier kiss having forged a deep connection that now manifested in perfect synchronization. They ducked, weaved, and struck in harmony, slowly pushing back the Akamarian forces. Ambassador Chen, proving her worth beyond the diplomatic arena, made a beeline for the Akamarian device. Her fingers flew over the alien controls, brow furrowed in concentration. "It's more complex than I anticipated," Chen called out, her voice tight with frustration. "Flora, I need your expertise in Wadi technology." As Mark held off the remaining Akamarians, Flora joined Chen at the control panel. The two women worked frantically, their efforts complicated by the ongoing battle around them. "We're running out of time," Flora said, her antennae twitching rapidly. "The power source, if we overload it, we can shut down the device." Chen's eyes widened. "But the resulting explosion could—" "I know," Flora interrupted, her voice resolute, "but we have no choice." Sensing Flora's intentions, Mark fought his way to her side. "Flora, wait!" he called out, his voice raw with emotion. "There has to be another way. I can't lose you. I love you." Flora's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of surprise and deep affection. In that moment of connection, her mind cleared. She saw a new possibility, a way to overload the device without putting herself in mortal danger. With renewed focus, Flora's hands danced over the controls. The device hummed louder, energy building to a crescendo. Just as the pitch became unbearable, Flora made a final adjustment. The Akamarian signal emitter overloaded and shut down with a thunderous boom. The high-frequency waves dissipated, bringing blessed relief to the suffering inhabitants of the palace. For a moment, silence reigned. Then a new alarm blared to life. Mark, Flora, and Ambassador Chen shared a look of dread as they realized the implications. "The Akamarian invasion fleet," Flora whispered, her voice barely audible over the wailing sirens. "They're here." As they raced back towards the royal chambers, Mark knew that disabling the signal emitter was only the beginning. The real battle for Zarxus, and perhaps the entire sector, was about to begin. Begin. The human reinforcements were hours away, leaving Zarxus exposed to the full might of the Akamarian invasion force. As they raced through the palace corridors, Mark's mind whirled with possibilities. The immediate threat demanded action. But what could they do against an entire invasion fleet? They burst into the war room, finding it a hive of frenzied activity. King Zorn stood at the center, his face etched with worry as he studied a holographic display of Zarxus's orbital defenses. Princess Lyria and Major Hawkins flanked him, pointing out weak spots in the planet's defenses. "Your Majesty," Mark called out, drawing the king's attention, "the signal emitter has been disabled, but the Akamarians are already here." King Zorn's eyes narrowed as he took in the group. For a moment, Mark feared the monarch would order their arrest, still suspecting them of treachery. Instead, the king's posture relaxed slightly. "You have proven your loyalty," King Zorn said, his voice carrying above the din of the war room. "In light of your actions, I hereby declare an official alliance between Earth and Zarxus. Mark Green, I appoint you as liaison between our forces." A ripple of surprise ran through the room. Several Wadi nobles exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared voice their objections in the face of the looming invasion. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic training kicking in. "Your Majesty, with your permission, I'll establish contact with Earth's Defense Command. We need reinforcements immediately." The king nodded his assent, and Chen hurried to a communication station. Mark turned to Flora, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared concern. "We need a way to hold off the Akamarians until help arrives," Mark said, his voice low and urgent. Flora's antennae twitched as she considered their options. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. "The planetary shield," she exclaimed. "If we can activate it, it could buy us the time we need." King Zorn overheard their exchange. "The shield generators were damaged during Vexor's coup attempt," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. Flora stepped forward, her posture radiating purpose. "Father, I can lead a team to repair the generators. I know the technology better than anyone." The king's face clouded with concern. "The facility is in the mountains, far from the palace. It's too dangerous." "Your Majesty," Mark interjected, "I'll go with her. Between my experience with the Acamarians and Flora's technical expertise, we stand the best chance of success. King Zorn studied Mark intently, seeming to weigh the human's worth. After a long moment, he nodded. Very well, but you won't go alone. Go. Major Hawkins stepped forward. I'll assign a squad of my best soldiers to accompany you. As final preparations were made, Mark and Flora found themselves in the palace armory. The gravity of their mission hung heavily between them as they donned protective gear. Mark, Flora said softly, her hand resting on his arm, I need to tell you. Before she could finish, Mark pulled her close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. For a moment, the chaos of the invasion faded away, leaving only the two of them. They broke apart as Dr. Zelna entered, carrying two sleek suits. These are designed to resist Acamarian weapons, she explained, helping them into their protective gear. Minutes later, they boarded a high-speed Wadi shuttle along with Hawkins' squad. As they soared towards the mountain facility, the true scale of the invasion became clear. The sky was filled with Acamarian ships, their ominous forms casting shadows over Xarxes' gleaming cities. Suddenly, a squadron of Acamarian scout ships peeled away from the main force, homing in on their shuttle. Mark's hands tightened on the controls as he prepared for evasive maneuvers. Flora, man, the defense systems, he called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As Mark piloted the shuttle through a series of dizzying turns and rolls, Flora's fingers danced over the weapons console. Their actions flowed in perfect synchronization, as if they could read each other's minds. Energy beams lanced out from the shuttle, catching one of the Acamarian ships off guard. It spiraled away, trailing smoke. The remaining scouts pressed their attack, forcing Mark into a steep dive towards a narrow canyon. Hold on, he shouted as the shuttle screamed between towering rock walls. The Acamarians followed, their larger ships struggling to match the shuttle's agility in the confined space. Flora fired a spread of energy bolts, catching another scout ship. It clipped the canyon wall, erupting in a fireball that forced its companions to veer off. As they emerged from the canyon, the mountain facility loomed ahead, but their relief was short-lived. The landing pad was crawling with Acamarian forces. We'll never make it through the main entrance, Flora said, her eyes scanning the facility's exterior. Mark's mind raced. Then he remembered something from their earlier adventures. The maintenance tunnels, he said. Can you guide us to a hidden entrance? Flora nodded, quickly plotting a new course. Mark brought the shuttle down in a small clearing, concealed from the facility by dense foliage. As they disembarked, Mark addressed Hawkins' squad. We'll infiltrate through the tunnels, stay alert, and follow Flora's lead. They moved swiftly through the undergrowth, Flora guiding them to a concealed hatch. As they descended into the dimly lit tunnels, Mark couldn't help but notice how naturally he and Flora moved together, anticipating each other's actions without a word. The team navigated through a maze of narrow passages, the sound of Acamarian patrols echoing ominously from above. At one point, Mark and Flora found themselves pressed together in a tight alcove, waiting for a group of aliens to pass by. The closeness sent a thrill through Mark, but he forced himself to focus on the mission. Finally, they reached the main control room. Through a small observation window, they could see it was heavily guarded by Acamarian soldiers. Mark turned to Flora, their eyes meeting in silent communication. Without a word, they understood exactly what needed to be done. In a burst of coordinated movement, they burst into the room. Mark's fist flew, augmented by his protective suit, as he engaged the nearest Acamarian. Flora wielded her energy weapon with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark. The human soldiers followed, their own attack perfectly complementing Mark and Flora's assault. In a matter of moments, the room was secured. Flora rushed to the control panel, her fingers flying over the complex array of buttons and switches. I need time, she said, her voice tense with concentration. Mark nodded, organizing the soldiers into a defensive perimeter. As Flora worked, he found his gaze continually drawn to her, marveling at her focus and dedication. Just as Flora announced, "It's done!" A massive explosion rocked the facility. Alarms blared as the sounds of renewed fighting echoed from the corridors. Acamarian reinforcements, Mark growled, raising his weapon. They must have realized what we're doing. He looked at Flora, seeing his own mixture of fear and persistence mirrored in her eyes. As the sounds of battle grew closer, they took up positions on either side of the door, ready to make their stand. The fate of Xarxis hung in the balance. The planetary shield was their only hope of holding off the invasion long enough for help to arrive. Mark and Flora exchanged a final look, their unspoken feelings clear in their eyes. As the first Acamarian soldiers rounded the corner, Mark and Flora opened fire, determined to hold their ground for as long as they could. The room erupted into chaos as energy blasts and projectiles flew in every direction. Mark and Flora moved with fluid precision, their earlier synchronization reaching new heights in the heat of battle. They ducked and weaved, taking down Acamarian soldiers with well-placed shots. But the enemy's numbers seemed endless, pouring through the doorway in an unrelenting tide. As Flora fired her weapon, she shouted over the din, "Mark, the shield's powering up, but it needs more time." Mark's mind raced. They couldn't hold this position indefinitely, and every second counted. His eyes darted around the control room, taking in the banks of computers and equipment. An idea struck him. "Flora, the facility's internal defenses. Can you activate them?" Flora's antennae twitched in understanding. She dove for a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Accessing the mainframe now." Mark provided covering fire, his muscles burning with exertion as he held back the Acamarian advance. Suddenly, a series of mechanical whirs and clicks echoed throughout the facility. Automated turrets emerged from hidden compartments in the walls and ceilings, their barrels swiveling to target the intruders. Energy barriers sprang to life in key choke points, forcing the Acamarians to funnel through narrower passages. The unexpected defenses caught them off guard, their formation breaking as they scrambled for cover. "It's working," Flora called out, a note of triumph in her voice. "This should slow them down." Mark nodded, allowing himself a moment of relief, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. "We need to fortify our position. Help me move these consoles." Together, they pushed several heavy control panels into a makeshift barricade, creating a defensible position with clear lines of fire. They crouched behind their cover, weapons at the ready as the sounds of battle drew closer once more. The Acamarians regrouped, pushing through the facility's defenses with stubborn persistence. They burst into the control room, their alien weapons spitting deadly energy bolts. Mark and Flora worked in perfect tandem, covering each other as they returned fire. Flora's technical expertise proved invaluable as she rerouted power to strengthen their defenses, while Mark's combat training allowed him to pick off key targets with precision. Their connection ran deeper than mere teamwork. They anticipated each other's movements instinctively, as if they shared one mind. But the Acamarians' superior numbers began to tell. An energy blast slipped past their defenses, grazing Flora's arm. She cried out in pain, her weapon clattering to the floor. "Flora!" Mark shouted, his heart seizing with fear. Without hesitation, he launched himself towards her, using his body as a shield against the incoming fire. They tumbled behind a console, Mark's arms wrapped protectively around Flora. For a moment, the chaos of battle faded away. Their eyes met, and in that instant, all the unspoken feelings between them crystallized. Mark cupped Flora's face in his hands, and their lips met in a passionate kiss. It was desperate and tender all at once, a declaration of love in the face of mortality. As they parted breathless, the facility's communication system crackled to life. Major Hawkins' voice cut through the din of battle, tinged with excitement. "Green, do you copy? Reinforcements have arrived. Earth's stealth fleet slipped past the Acamarian blockade. We're engaging their ships in orbit now." A surge of hope coursed through Mark and Flora. They shared a determined look before returning to the fight with renewed vigor. The sounds of space combat could be heard even through the facility's thick walls, a cacophony of explosions and energy weapons that shook the very air. Flora's fingers danced over a nearby console, her eyes widening as she read the display. "Mark, the planetary shield, it's reached full power." As if on cue, a shimmering energy field expanded across the sky, visible even from the facility's windows. The remaining Akamarian ships in the atmosphere bounced off the shield like insects hitting a pane of glass, forced to retreat to the space battle above. King Zorn's voice boomed over the communication system, filled with a mixture of relief and pride. "Mark, Flora, you've done it. Wadi forces are en route to retake the facility, and I have more good news. Princess Lyria has successfully led a counterattack against Vexor's loyalists in the capital. The palace and government buildings are secure." As Mark and Flora exchanged triumphant smiles, a hush fell over the battlefield. The Akamarian forces parted, revealing a towering figure striding into the control room. Even without introduction, Mark knew this must be their leader, the infamous Warlord, Krazuk. The Akamarian commander's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You have fought well, humans and Wadi alike, but this ends now. I, Krazuk, challenge you, Mark Green, to single combat. If you defeat me, my forces will withdraw. If I am victorious, Xarxis falls." Mark felt Flora's hand grip his arm tightly. "Mark, no," she whispered urgently. "It's too dangerous." But Mark saw the opportunity for what it was, a chance to end this conflict quickly and save countless lives. He met Krazuk's alien gaze steadily. "I accept your challenge, Krazuk." As Mark stepped forward, Flora's worried eyes followed him. Her fingers moved subtly over her console, boosting the facility's defenses and secretly relaying their situation to the approaching Wadi forces. Whatever happened next, she would not leave Mark to face this alone. The control room fell silent as Mark squared off against the imposing Akamarian warlord. Krazuk towered over him, all rippling muscle and gleaming armored scales. But Mark stood tall, drawing strength from Flora's presence and the knowledge that the fate of Xarxis hung in the balance. As they circled each other, tension thick in the air, Mark's mind raced through combat strategies. He knew this battle would test him like never before, pushing him to his absolute limits. But with Flora's anxious gaze upon him and the future of two worlds at stake, Mark was determined to prevail. Krazuk's eyes narrowed, his alien features twisting into what might have been a grin. Without warning, he lunged forward, marking the start of a duel that would decide the fate of worlds. Xarxis. As the first Akamarian soldiers rounded the corner, Mark and Flora opened fire, determined to hold their ground for as long as they could. The room erupted into chaos as energy blasts and projectiles flew in every direction. Mark and Flora moved with fluid precision, their earlier synchronization reaching new heights in the heat of battle. They ducked and weaved, taking down Akamarian soldiers with well-placed shots. But the enemy's numbers seemed endless, pouring through the doorway in an unrelenting tide. As Flora fired her weapon, she shouted over the din, "Mark, the shield's powering up, but it needs more time." Mark's mind raced. They couldn't hold this position indefinitely, and every second counted. His eyes darted around the control room, taking in the banks of computers and equipment. An idea struck him. "Flora, the facility's internal defenses. Can you activate them?" Flora's antennae twitched in understanding. She dove for a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Accessing the mainframe now." Mark provided covering fire, his muscles burning with exertion as he held back the Akamarian advance. Suddenly, a series of mechanical whirs and clicks echoed throughout the facility. Automated turrets emerged from hidden compartments in the walls and ceilings, their barrels swiveling to target the intruders. Energy barriers sprang to life in key choke points, forcing the Akamarians to funnel through narrower passages. The unexpected defenses caught them off guard, their formation breaking as they scrambled for cover. "It's working," Flora called out, a note of triumph in her voice. "This should slow them down." Mark nodded, allowing himself a moment of relief, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. "We need to fortify our position. Help me move these consoles." Together, they pushed several heavy control panels into a makeshift barricade, creating a defensible position with clear lines of fire. They crouched behind their cover, weapons at the ready as the sounds of battle drew closer once more. The Akamarians regrouped, pushing through the facility's defenses with stubborn persistence. They burst into the control room, their alien weapons spitting deadly energy bolts. Mark and Flora worked in perfect tandem, covering each other as they returned fire. Flora's technical expertise proved invaluable as she rerouted power to strengthen their defenses, while Mark's combat training allowed him to pick off key targets with precision. Their connection ran deeper than mere teamwork. They anticipated each other's movements instinctively, as if they shared one mind. But the Akamarians' superior numbers began to tell. An energy blast slipped past their defenses, grazing Flora's arm. She cried out in pain, her weapon clattering to the floor. "Flora!" Mark shouted, his heart seizing with fear. Without hesitation, he launched himself towards her, using his body as a shield against the incoming fire. They tumbled behind a console, Mark's arms wrapped protectively around Flora. For a moment, the chaos of battle faded away. Their eyes met, and in that instant, all the unspoken feelings between them crystallized. Mark cupped Flora's face in his hands, and their lips met in a passionate kiss. It was desperate and tender all at once, a declaration of love in the face of mortality. As they parted breathless, the facility's communication system crackled to life. Major Hawkins's voice cut through the din of battle, tinged with excitement. "Green, do you copy? Reinforcements have arrived. Earth's stealth fleet slipped past the Akamarian blockade. We're engaging their ships in orbit now." A surge of hope coursed through Mark and Flora. They shared a determined look before returning to the fight with renewed vigor. The sounds of space combat could be heard even through the facility's thick walls, a cacophony of explosions and energy weapons that shook the very air. Flora's fingers danced over a nearby console, her eyes widening as she read the display. "Mark, the planetary shield. It's reached full power." As if on cue, a shimmering energy field expanded across the sky, visible even from the facility's windows. The remaining Akamarian ships in the atmosphere bounced off the shield like insects hitting a pane of glass, forced to retreat to the space battle above. King Zorn's voice boomed over the communication system, filled with a mixture of relief and pride. "Mark, Flora, you've done it. Wadi forces are en route to retake the facility, and I have more good news. Princess Laria has successfully led a counterattack against Vexor's loyalists in the capital. The palace and government buildings are secure." As Mark and Flora exchanged triumphant smiles, a hush fell over the battlefield. The Akamarian forces parted, revealing a towering figure striding into the control room. Even without introduction, Mark knew this must be their leader, the infamous Warlord, Krazuk. The Akamarian commander's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You have fought well, humans and Wadi alike, but this ends now. I, Krazuk, challenge you, Mark Green, to single combat. If you defeat me, my forces will withdraw. If I am victorious, Xarxis falls." Mark felt Flora's hand grip his arm tightly. "Mark, no," she whispered urgently. "It's too dangerous." But Mark saw the opportunity for what it was, a chance to end this conflict quickly and save countless lives. He met Krazuk's alien gaze steadily. "I accept your challenge, Krazuk." As Mark stepped forward, Flora's worried eyes followed him. Her fingers moved subtly over her console, boosting the facility's defenses and secretly relaying their situation to the approaching Wadi forces. Whatever happened next, she would not leave Mark to face this alone. The control room fell silent as Mark squared off against the imposing Akamarian warlord. Krazuk towered over him, all rippling muscle and gleaming armored scales. But Mark stood tall, drawing strength from Flora's presence and the knowledge that the fate of Xarxis hung in the balance. As they circled each other, tension thick in the air, Mark's mind raced through combat strategies. He knew this battle would test him like never before, pushing him to his absolute limits. But with Flora's anxious gaze upon him and the future of two worlds at stake, Mark was determined to prevail. Krazuk's eyes narrowed, his alien features twisting into what might have been a grin. Without warning, he lunged forward, his massive clawed hands swiping through the air. Mark narrowly dodged the attack, his human reflexes allowing him to duck and weave around the Akamarian's powerful blows. The control room became an impromptu arena, with Akamarian and human soldiers alike forming a tense circle around the combatants. Flora watched anxiously from her position, behind the control console, her fingers hovering over the facility's defense systems, ready to intervene if necessary. Mark's smaller stature and agility contrasted sharply with Krasuk's brute strength and imposing presence. As they circled each other, Mark searched for weaknesses in the Akamarian's armor, while Krasuk attempted to corner his smaller opponent. The human diplomat's training proved unexpectedly useful in this deadly dance. Mark began to notice patterns in Krasuk's fighting style, identifying subtle tells that signaled the Akamarian's next move. This allowed him to anticipate and counter Krasuk's attacks more effectively, frustrating the alien warlord. Krasuk's massive fist whistled past Mark's ear as he ducked, the force of the blow creating a gust of wind. Mark retaliated with a quick jab to Krasuk's midsection, but his fist met unyielding armor. The Akamarian laughed, a guttural sound that sent chills down Mark's spine. "Your human weakness amuses me," Krasuk taunted, his voice a low rumble. "Soon you will tire, and Xarxus will fall." Mark didn't waste breath on a reply, focusing instead on staying alive. He sidestepped another crushing blow, feeling the vibration through the floor as Krasuk's fist left a dent in the metal plating. As the fight intensified, Flora divided her attention between monitoring the planetary shield's status and watching Mark's perilous duel. A plan began to form in her mind. If she could boost the shield's power for just a few more minutes, it would create a resonance frequency capable of disabling all Akamarian technology within the planet's atmosphere. Her antennae twitched as she ran the calculations. The power boost would require shutting down the facility's life support systems, putting Mark and herself at risk. Flora's fingers hovered over the controls, her heart racing as she weighed the potential cost against the chance for victory. Meanwhile, the fight between Mark and Krasuk reached a new level of intensity. The Akamarian warlord, enraged by Mark's ability to avoid his attacks, activated hidden blades in his armor. Each missed punch now became a potentially lethal slash, the air singing with the passage of razor-sharp edges. Mark's uniform soon bore the evidence of near misses, torn and bloodied in several places. His breathing grew labored, muscles burning with exertion. It became clear that he couldn't outlast the Akamarian in a prolonged fight. Realizing this, Mark decided to take a risky gambit. He allowed Krasuk to back him into a corner, appearing to be on the verge of defeat. The Akamarian's eyes gleamed with triumph as he moved in for the kill. Flora, seeing Mark's predicament, made her decision. Her fingers flew across the console, initiating the shield power boost. The facility's lights flickered and dimmed as power was diverted to the planetary shield. The sudden change in lighting momentarily distracted Krasuk, providing Mark with the opening he needed. In a burst of speed, Mark ducked under Krasuk's guard and targeted a weak point in the Akamarian's armor that he had identified earlier. He struck with precision, using a combination of human martial arts and knowledge of Akamarian physiology gained from his diplomatic briefings. The blow landed perfectly, causing Krasuk to stumble and lose his balance. Taking advantage of the Akamarian's momentary vulnerability, Mark executed a series of rapid strikes targeting pressure points on Krasuk's body. The warlord, caught off guard by the human's unexpected knowledge of Akamarian weak spots, began to falter. As the fight reached its climax, the planetary shield reached full power. A wave of energy pulsed through the facility, temporarily disabling all Akamarian technology. Krasuk's armor, which had been enhancing his strength and speed, suddenly powered down, leaving him vulnerable. Mark seized this opportunity to deliver a final, decisive blow. He used a Wadi combat technique taught to him by Flora during their earlier training sessions, channeling the last of his strength into a powerful strike. Krasuk, stripped of his technological advantages and caught by surprise by the alien move, finally fell. The control room erupted in a cacophony of shouts and cries as Krasuk hit the ground. The Akamarian forces, their leader defeated and their technology disabled, found themselves at a severe disadvantage. The sounds of approaching Wadi forces, led by Princess Lyria, echoed through the facility as they began to retake the mountain complex floor by floor. Mark, his body pushed beyond its limits, collapsed to his knees. Flora rushed to his side, cradling him in her arms. Their eyes met, a mix of relief, admiration, and deepening affection passing between them. Flora began to use her knowledge of Wadi healing techniques to treat Mark's wounds. their close proximity and the intensity of the moment further strengthening their bond. However, their moment of respite was short-lived. An emergency transmission from King Zorn interrupted them, his voice tight with urgency. "Mark, Flora, we have a critical situation. While the ground battle on Zarxus is turning in our favor, the space combat above the planet has taken a dire turn. The human fleet is outnumbered and outgunned by the Acamarian Armada. Without additional support, they'll soon be overwhelmed." Mark and Flora exchanged a look of grim understanding. Their victory in the mountain facility was only the first step in a larger conflict. As the sounds of continued fighting echoed through the complex, they knew their greatest challenge still lay ahead. Flora helped Mark to his feet, supporting him as they made their way back to the control console. The fate of two worlds now rested on their ability to turn the tide of the space battle. As they began to formulate a plan, the weight of their responsibility settled upon them, tempered by the newfound strength they found in each other's presence. The battle for Zarxus was just the beginning, and the next phase would test not only their skills and ingenuity, but also the bond that had formed between them in the heat of conflict. Combat above the planet taking a dire turn. The weight of their new challenge settled heavily upon them, but they knew they had to act swiftly. "We need to get to the control console," Mark said, his voice strained with exhaustion. "There must be something we can do to help our fleet." Flora nodded, supporting Mark as they made their way across the room. As they approached the console, the facility shook with the impact of a nearby explosion. The battle for the mountain complex was still raging, but the sounds of combat were growing closer. Suddenly, the doors to the control room burst open. Mark tensed, ready for another fight, but relaxed when he saw Princess Lyria leading a group of Wadi soldiers into the room. "Mark, Flora!" Lyria called out, her antennae twitching with excitement. "We've retaken most of the facility, but we have little time to celebrate. I've just received word about the space battle." Mark nodded grimly. "We heard. The human fleet is in trouble. We need to find a way to turn the tide up there." Lyria's eyes gleamed with a mix of hope and apprehension. "There might be a way. Follow me." As they exited the control room, Lyria explained, "We have a secret weapon. The Stellar Nexus, our most advanced battleship, is docked in a hidden hangar beneath this mountain." Flora's antennae perked up in surprise. "The Stellar Nexus? But it's never been used in actual combat. The systems are highly experimental." "Exactly why it's our best shot," Mark said, a plan forming in his mind. "Princess, we need to take that ship into battle." Lyria hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed, but be warned, its systems are incredibly complex." As they made their way through the facility's winding corridors, they encountered Dr. Zelna and a team of Wadi scientists rushing towards them. "Perfect timing," Dr. Zelna said, her voice tight with urgency. She held out two sleek alien devices. "These are prototype neural interface headsets. They'll allow you to control the Stellar Nexus with unprecedented precision." Mark took one of the devices, examining it closely. "What's the catch?" Dr. Zelna's expression grew serious. "The neural link is intense. It could potentially cause sensory overload or other unforeseen consequences." Flora and Mark exchanged a look. Without a word, they both understood the risks and the necessity of taking them. "We'll do it," Flora said, taking the other headset. They continued their descent into the mountain's depths, eventually reaching a massive hangar bay. There, gleaming under harsh lighting, sat the Stellar Nexus. Its sleek design blended organic Wadi aesthetics with sharp, angular lines reminiscent of Acamarian technology. As they approached the ship, Mark felt a surge of nervous energy. This vessel represented the best chance for victory, but also an unknown danger. Inside the Stellar Nexus, Mark and Flora made their way to the bridge. The ship's interior was a marvel of advanced technology, with holographic displays and control surfaces that seemed to shift and change as they watched. They took their positions at the helm, the neural interface headsets fitting snugly over their heads. As soon as the connection was established, Mark gasped. Information flooded his mind. Ship systems, tactical data, sensor readings, all processed at an incredible speed. But more than that, he felt Flora's presence in his mind. Their thoughts intertwined, creating a seamless link between them and the ship's AI. It was overwhelming, intimate, and exhilarating all at once. "Are you ready?" Flora's voice echoed in his mind, tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Mark sent back a wave of affirmation, words unnecessary in their shared mental space. The stellar Nexus hummed to life, systems powering up with a low thrum that resonated through the ship. The hangar bay doors above them opened, revealing a star-filled sky marred by the flashes of distant explosions. With a thought, Mark and Flora guided the ship upward. The stellar Nexus shot out of its hidden berth, climbing rapidly through Xarxes' atmosphere. As they breached the planet's exosphere, the full scope of the space battle came into view. The human fleet was surrounded, taking heavy fire from all sides. Akamarian ships swarmed around them, their superior numbers and firepower pushing the Earth vessels to their limits. Through their neural link, Mark and Flora formulated a strategy in seconds. They guided the stellar Nexus into the heart of the battle, its advanced stealth systems keeping them undetected until the last moment. As they closed in on the nearest Akamarian battle group, Mark and Flora unleashed the stellar Nexus's weapons. Beams of energy lanced out, cutting through the enemy ships with surgical precision. Akamarian vessels exploded in silent bursts of light and debris. The sudden appearance of this new, devastatingly effective ship threw the Akamarian fleet into disarray. The human forces, seizing the opportunity, rallied and began to push back. Mark and Flora worked in perfect synchronization, their minds so closely linked that it became difficult to tell where one's thoughts ended and the other's began. They anticipated each other's moves, reacted to threats faster than humanly possible, and guided the stellar Nexus with a grace that belied the chaos of battle around them. But as the fight wore on, the strain of maintaining such a deep neural connection began to take its toll. Mark felt a pressure building in his head, a sensory overload that threatened to overwhelm him. Through their link, he sensed Flora experiencing the same discomfort. Their shared consciousness began to blur at the edges. Memories flowed between them. Mark's childhood on Earth, Flora's early days in the Wadi diplomatic corps. Emotions bled from one to the other, intensifying their already strong connection. Despite the growing discomfort, they pressed on. The Akamarian fleet was on the defensive now, their formations broken and scattered. Victory was within reach, but the cost was becoming increasingly apparent. As they targeted the Akamarian flagship, bringing the full might of the stellar Nexus to bear, Mark and Flora's individual consciousnesses began to merge further. Their separate identities started to fade, blending into a single, shared mind. The Akamarian flagship erupted in a massive explosion, the shock wave rippling through space. Around them, the remaining enemy ships began to break off, retreating in the face of this unexpected defeat. But aboard the stellar Nexus, a new crisis was unfolding. As Mark and Flora disengaged from the ship's systems, they found their minds still intimately linked. Memories, thoughts, and emotions continued to flow freely between them, their individual selves blurred beyond recognition. As the cheers of victory echoed through the communication channels, Mark and Flora faced an uncertain future. They had won the battle for Xarxes, but at what cost to themselves? The boundaries between them had been erased, leaving them grappling with a shared consciousness that defied their understanding of individual identity. The stellar Nexus drifted in the aftermath of the battle, its two pilots locked in a mental embrace that neither fully understood nor knew how to break. As the adrenaline of combat faded, they were left to face the consequences of their deep neural bond and its profound implications for their future together. As the stellar Nexus drifted in the aftermath of the battle, Mark and Flora remained locked in their mental embrace, unable to distinguish where one consciousness ended and the other began. The ship's advanced AI, detecting the pilot's distress, initiated an emergency protocol. Thrusters fired, guiding the vessel back towards Xarxes. The descent through the planet's atmosphere was a blur of sensations and memories. Mark felt the exhilaration of Flora's first diplomatic mission, while she experienced the awe of his first spacewalk. Their shared mind reeled with the influx of alien experiences. With a gentle thud, the stellar Nexus touched down in the hidden hangar beneath the mountain facility. The moment the ship landed, alarms blared throughout the complex. Dr. Zelna, who had been anxiously monitoring the situation, sprang into action. "Medical team to the hangar now," she barked into her communicator, her antennae twitching with urgency. The hangar door slid open, and a group of Wadi medics rushed in, led by Dr. Zelna. They approached the stellar Nexus cautiously, uncertain of what they might find inside. As the ship's hatch opened with a hiss, Mark and Flora were revealed, still seated at the helm, their bodies rigid and unmoving. The neural interface headsets pulsed with an eerie blue light. Dr. Xelna's eyes widened as she took in the scene. "Careful," she warned her team. "We can't risk sudden disconnection. It could cause permanent neural damage." The medics worked swiftly but cautiously, attaching monitoring devices to both Mark and Flora. Holographic displays sprang to life, showing a tangle of neural pathways that seemed to flow between the two bodies. "By the stars," Dr. Zelna muttered, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her concern. "Their neural patterns have completely intertwined." As the medical team worked, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hangar. King Zorn strode in, flanked by Princess Lyria and Ambassador Chen. Their faces were a mix of concern and apprehension. "Doctor," King Zorn's voice boomed, "what is the meaning of this? What's happened to my daughter and the human diplomat?" Dr. Selna turned to face the king, her expression grave. "Your Majesty, it appears the neural interface of the stellar Nexus has caused an unexpected merging of their consciousnesses. We're working to stabilize their condition, but separating them will be complicated." Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Complicated how, Doctor?" Dr. Exelna gestured to the holographic displays. "Their neural pathways have become deeply entangled. Separating them too quickly could cause irreparable damage to both minds. We need to proceed with extreme caution." King Zorn's antennae twitched with agitation. "What do you propose, Doctor?" "A gradual separation process," Dr. Selna replied. "It will require them to remain in close physical proximity for several days while we administer a series of specialized treatments. We'll need to set up a controlled environment where we can monitor them constantly." The king's eyes narrowed. "Close physical proximity after everything that's happened?" Ambassador Chen placed a hand on King Zorn's arm. "Your Majesty, I understand your concerns, but Mark and Flora have just saved both our worlds. Surely we owe them our full support in their recovery?" King Zorn's expression softened slightly. He looked at his daughter's motionless form, then at Mark. After a long moment, he nodded. "Very well, but I want them under constant supervision. We cannot risk any further incidents." "Of course, Your Majesty," Dr. Zelna agreed. She turned to her team. "Prepare the Royal Medical Suite. We'll need to move them immediately." As the medical team carefully disconnected Mark and Flora from the ship's systems, their bodies remained rigid, eyes unfocused. They were gently placed on hovering stretchers and moved out of the hangar. The procession made its way through the winding corridors of the mountain facility, eventually reaching the palace proper. The Royal Medical Suite, typically reserved for the Wadi monarchy, had been quickly outfitted with a mix of human and Wadi medical equipment. Mark and Flora were transferred to a large, circular bed in the center of the room. As soon as they were laid side by side, their bodies visibly relaxed, turning towards each other as if drawn by an unseen force. Dr. Zelna observed this with a mix of fascination and concern. She turned to the assembled leaders. "We'll begin the separation process immediately, but I must warn you, this is uncharted territory. There may be unexpected developments." King Zorn nodded grimly. "Do what you must, Doctor. Just bring them back." As the medical team began their work, attaching sensors and preparing treatments, Ambassador Chen pulled King Zorn aside. "Your Majesty," she said in a low voice, "while Mark and Flora recover, we need to discuss the implications of what's happened. The Akamarian's fleet has retreated, but our intelligence suggests they're regrouping. We need to prepare for a potential counterattack." King Zorn's antennae drooped slightly, the weight of his responsibilities settling heavily upon him. "You're right, Ambassador. Let us convene the War Council. We have much to discuss." As the king and the ambassador left the medical suite, Dr. Zelna turned her attention back to her patients. Mark and Flora lay still, their breathing synchronized, their minds still lost in a shared consciousness. The doctor knew that separating them would be a delicate process, fraught with unknown risks. She took a deep breath and began the first phase of the treatment, knowing that the next few days would be crucial not only for Mark and Flora, but potentially for the future of the Earth-Zarxis alliance. Dr. Selna's antennae twitched nervously as she initiated the first phase of the treatment. She had just begun adjusting the neural stabilizers when a piercing alarm shattered the tense silence of the medical suite. Warning, Acamarian fleet detected in Zarxis orbit. All personnel to battle stations. An automated voice blared through the facility's communication system. The doctor's hands froze over the controls as she processed the implications. The Acamarians had regrouped far more quickly than anyone had anticipated, catching the Earth-Zarxis alliance completely off guard. King Zorn burst into the medical suite, his regal composure barely masking his panic. "Doctor, we need them operational. Now!" Dr. Zelna's eyes widened in shock. "Your Majesty, I've barely begun the separation process. Reconnecting them to the stellar nexus could cause irreparable damage to their minds." "We have no choice," the king declared, his antennae rigid with drive. "The Acamarians are here in force. Without the stellar nexus, we don't stand a chance." Ambassador Chen, who had followed the king into the room, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, please reconsider. The risks to Mark and Flora are necessary," King Zorn cut her off. "Doctor, proceed with the reconnection immediately." With trembling hands, Dr. Zelna began reversing the separation protocols. As she worked, Mark and Flora's bodies tensed, their fingers intertwining more tightly. The neural interface headsets, which had been removed earlier, were carefully replaced. The moment the connection was reestablished, both Mark and Flora gasped in unison, their backs arching off the bed. Their eyes flew open, glowing with an otherworldly blue light. "Stellar Nexus, we hear you," they spoke in perfect synchronization, their voices overlapping in an eerie chorus. Alarms blared throughout the facility as the first waves of Acamarian ships entered Zarxis' atmosphere. King Zorn turned to Dr. Gzelna, his expression grim. "Get them to the hangar, now." As Mark and Flora were rushed through the corridors on a hovering stretcher, their minds reeled from the intensity of their renewed connection. Memories and emotions flowed between them like a raging torrent, their individual identities blurring even further. In the hangar, they were quickly transferred to the Stellar Nexus's cockpit. The moment they settled into their seats, the ship's systems roared to life, responding to their shared consciousness. The hangar doors slid open, revealing a sky filled with Acamarian warships. Without hesitation, Mark and Flora guided the Stellar Nexus into the fray, their movements fluid and precise. In orbit, the Earth-Zarxis fleet struggled against the overwhelming Acamarian forces. But as the Stellar Nexus joined the battle, the tide began to turn. Mark and Flora's enhanced connection allowed them to push the ship beyond its known limits, unlocking hidden weapon systems and defensive capabilities. They wove through the chaos of battle with impossible grace, their minds working in perfect harmony to anticipate and counter every Acamarian move. Energy beams lanced out from the Stellar Nexus, cutting through enemy ships with surgical precision. But the strain of maintaining such a deep neural link was taking its toll. Mark felt a searing pain behind his eyes, while Flora struggled to breathe through the pressure building in her chest. Yet they pushed on, their shared purpose overriding their individual discomfort. On the planet's surface, another battle was unfolding. A group of Acamarian commandos had managed to infiltrate the royal palace, catching the defenders off guard. King Zorn, his warrior heritage shining through, led the counterattack personally. Princess Lyraya fought at his side, her diplomatic finesse translated into tactical brilliance as she coordinated the palace guards. Ambassador Chen, drawing on her years of studying Acamarian culture, provided invaluable insights into the invaders' strategies. Her quick thinking allowed the defenders to stay one step ahead, gradually pushing the Acamarians back. In space, Mark and Flora made a startling discovery. As they delved deeper into the Stellar Nexus's systems, they uncovered a weapons array of unprecedented power. Activating it required them to divert energy from life support, a decision that could prove fatal if the battle dragged on too long. They didn't hesitate. In perfect synchronization, they rerouted power from life support to weapons. The temperature in the cockpit began to drop, and warning lights flashed as oxygen levels decreased. But the stellar Nexus's firepower increased exponentially. The Akamarian fleet, unprepared for this sudden escalation, began to falter. Ship after ship fell to the stellar Nexus's enhanced weaponry, leaving gaping holes in their formation. Sensing defeat, the Akamarian commander made a bold strategy. They ordered a concentrated assault on Xarxus's planetary shield generators, hoping to leave the planet vulnerable to orbital bombardment. Mark and Flora, their minds operating as one, instantly recognized the threat. They pushed the stellar Nexus to its absolute limit, straining against the G-forces as they raced to intercept the Akamarian strike force. With oxygen running low and their neural link causing increasing physical pain, they unleashed a final, devastating barrage. The Akamarian ships targeting the shield generators erupted in silent explosions, their debris scattering across Xarxus's orbit. As the last Akamarian ship fell, Mark and Flora felt their grip on reality slipping. Their merged consciousness began to fragment, memories and personalities bleeding together in a chaotic swirl. They could no longer tell where Mark ended and Flora began, their individual selves lost in a sea of shared experiences. In the palace medical suite, Dr. Selna watched their vital signs with growing alarm. "We need to disconnect them now," she shouted into her communicator. "Any longer, and the damage may be irreversible." King Zorn, having just secured the palace, gave the order for immediate extraction. As the stellar Nexus made its shaky descent back to the hangar, a team of medical experts stood ready. The moment the ship touched down, Dr. Zelna and her team rushed in. They found Mark and Flora unconscious, their bodies intertwined in the cockpit, neural interface headsets pulsing with an intense blue light. As they began the delicate process of disconnection, Dr. Zelna noticed something unprecedented. Mark and Flora's neural patterns were resisting separation, as if their minds had become so thoroughly entwined that they could no longer exist independently. In a moment of inspiration born of desperation, Dr. Zelna employed an experimental Wadi technique. She placed her hands on both their foreheads, using her own mind as a bridge to stabilize their neural patterns. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, Mark and Flora's vital signs began to stabilize. Their bodies relaxed, though their hands remained tightly clasped. Dr. Zelna stepped back, exhausted but relieved. "They're stable," she announced to the anxious onlookers. "But they've slipped into comas. The long-term effects of what they've experienced, I can't even begin to predict." As Mark and Flora were carefully transferred to the medical bay, their hands still linked, King Zorn and Ambassador Chen exchanged worried glances. The battle was won, but at what cost? And what challenges lay ahead for these two heroes, lost in the depths of their shared consciousness? Consciousness. As Mark and Flora lay motionless in the medical bay, their hands remained firmly clasped, defying all attempts to separate them. Dr. Zelna stood at the foot of their bed, her antennae twitching with concern as she studied the array of monitors displaying their vital signs. "Fascinating," she murmured, noting the perfect synchronization of their heartbeats and brainwaves. "It's as if their bodies refuse to acknowledge their physical separation." King Zorn entered the medical bay, his earlier anger replaced by a deep worry etched across his features. "Doctor, what's the latest?" Dr. Gzelna turned to face the king, her expression grave. "Your Majesty, their condition is stable, but their neural patterns remain deeply intertwined. Conventional methods of separating their consciousnesses have proven ineffective." The king's antennae drooped slightly. "What do you propose?" "I've been developing a revolutionary treatment," Dr. Zelna explained, leading King Zorn to a holographic display. "It combines our Wadi healing crystals with Earth-based neurotechnology. The procedure would require submerging both patients in a specially designed tank filled with a nutrient-rich, conductive gel." As Dr. Selna outlined the details of the treatment, King Zorn listened intently, his antennae slowly rising with renewed hope. "You have my full support, Doctor. Whatever resources you need, they're yours." Ambassador Chen, who had been silently observing from the corner of the room, stepped forward. "I'll coordinate with Earth to bring in our top neurological experts. This could be an opportunity for unprecedented collaboration between our species." Over the next few days, the medical facility buzzed with activity. Human scientists arrived, their excitement palpable as they worked alongside their Wadi counterparts. The air crackled with the exchange of ideas and theories, each breakthrough bringing them closer to unraveling the mystery of Mark and Flora's condition. As preparations for the procedure continued, strange phenomena began to manifest. Mark and Flora's vital signs would suddenly spike in unison, their bodies tensing as if reacting to an unseen stimulus. More disconcerting were the moments when they would speak in perfect synchronization, uttering fragments of sentences that hinted at shared experiences beyond normal comprehension. "Stars singing," they whispered one afternoon, their voices blending into an eerie harmony that sent chills through the medical staff. Outside the palace, the atmosphere on Zarxis was shifting. The heroic actions of Mark and Flora during the Acamarian attack had not gone unnoticed. Crowds gathered daily, holding vigils and leaving offerings for the comatose couple. The Wadi people, once wary of humans, now spoke of them with admiration and gratitude. Princess Lyria, moved by her sister's plight and the outpouring of public support, took to addressing the crowds. "The bond between Flora and Mark represents the potential of our two species working together," she proclaimed. Her words met with enthusiastic cheers. Inside the palace, King Zorn found himself reevaluating his stance on human-Wadi relations. He engaged in long discussions with Ambassador Chen, exploring the possibilities of cultural exchange programs and joint scientific ventures. Finally, the day of the procedure arrived. The medical bay had been transformed, dominated by two large cylindrical tanks filled with a shimmering blue-green gel. A network of tubes and wires connected the tanks to an array of sophisticated equipment, a seamless blend of human and Wadi technology. Dr. Zelna took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. With utmost care, Mark and Flora were lowered into the tanks, their hands finally separating as the gel enveloped them. The doctor activated the Wadi healing crystals, which began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light. As the procedure progressed, the tension in the room became palpable. Mark and Flora's vital signs fluctuated wildly, their bodies convulsing within the gel. Dr. Zelna and her team worked feverishly, adjusting parameters and energy levels with split-second precision. Suddenly, a tremor shook the facility. Lights flickered and alarms blared as a power surge, a lingering effect of the Acamarian attack, threatened to disrupt the delicate procedure. The backup generators kicked in, but not before causing a dangerous spike in neural activity for both patients. Dr. Zelna's antennae stood rigid with dedication. In a move that drew gasps from her colleagues, she increased the power of the healing crystals beyond recommended levels, placing her hands directly on the tanks. Energy coursed through her body, her face contorted in pain as she channeled her own life force to stabilize Mark and Flora's neural patterns. The gamble paid off. Slowly, impossibly, Mark and Flora's brainwaves began to desynchronize. On the monitors, two distinct patterns emerged, growing more defined with each passing moment. But the battle was far from finished. As their minds separated, both patients thrashed in their tanks, caught in the grip of vivid hallucinations, their faces contorted in a mixture of pain and wonder, reliving the incredible journey they had shared. Just as it seemed the procedure would succeed, disaster struck. Mark and Flora's vital signs plummeted, their bodies going into shock. The medical team sprang into action, fighting desperately to revive them. In that critical moment, Dr. Zelna made a decision that would change everything. With a look of grim purpose, she pressed her forehead against both tanks, forming a telepathic link with Mark and Flora's minds. The world fell away as Dr. Zelna found herself in a swirling vortex of memories and sensations. She saw glimpses of Earth and Zarxis, felt the exhilaration of piloting the stellar Nexus, experienced the terror and triumph of battle. Through it all, she called out to Mark and Flora, guiding them back to their individual selves. In the medical bay, 10 seconds stretched into minutes. Then miraculously, Mark and Flora's vital signs stabilized. Their neural patterns, while still bearing the marks of their shared experience, now registered as distinct and separate. As relief washed over the room, Dr. Selna stumbled back from the tanks. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor, her mind overwhelmed by the intensity of the connection she had forged. Medical staff rushed to attend to all three patients, the celebratory mood tempered by uncertainty. As Mark and Flora were carefully lifted from their tanks, their eyes fluttered open, unfocused but undeniably alive. Dr. Zelna lay unconscious, her antennae twitching sporadically, hinting at the turmoil within her mind. King Zorn and Ambassador Chen watched from the observation room, their expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. The immediate crisis had passed, but the true test was yet to come. As the recovery process began, questions loomed large. Would Mark and Flora retain their memories? Had Dr. Zelna's mind been irrevocably altered by her brave intervention? And how would these events shape the future of Earth-Zarxus relations? In the dimly lit medical bay, three heroes lay still, their fates intertwined in ways none could have predicted. The soft beep of monitors and the hum of medical equipment filled the air, a quiet symphony heralding the beginning of a new chapter in this interstellar saga. The soft beep of monitors continued its steady rhythm as Mark's eyes fluttered open. He blinked slowly, his vision gradually focusing on the unfamiliar ceiling above him. The sterile smell of the medical bay filled his nostrils, grounding him in reality. "He's awake," a voice called out, followed by a flurry of activity around his bed. Mark tried to sit up, his muscles protesting the movement. A gentle hand pressed against his shoulder, easing him back down. "Easy there, Ambassador," Dr. Lin, one of the human neurologists, said softly. "You've been through quite an ordeal." Mark's mind felt foggy, filled with a jumble of images and sensations. He saw Earth's blue oceans and Zarxus's crystalline spires, felt the exhilaration of piloting the stellar Nexus, and the warmth of Flora's presence in his mind. "Flora," he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Where's Flora?" Dr. Lin exchanged a glance with a Wadi medical officer before answering. "Princess Flora is recovering in a separate room. She regained consciousness shortly after you." Relief washed over Mark, quickly followed by a wave of disorientation. He closed his eyes, trying to sort through the tangle of memories in his mind. When he opened them again, he found himself staring at a piece of equipment labeled in Wadi script. To his surprise, he could read it perfectly. "That's unusual," he muttered, drawing Dr. Lin's attention. "What is it, Ambassador?" Mark pointed at the equipment. "I can read that, but I've never studied Wadi writing before." Dr. Lin's eyebrows shot up. He made a note on his datapad, then asked, "Can you tell me the last thing you remember before waking up here?" Mark's brow furrowed as he concentrated. "The battle, Flora and I in the stellar Nexus, then nothing clear, just flashes and feelings." As Mark struggled to piece together his fragmented memories, King Zorn and Ambassador Chen were quickly informed of his improved condition. They arrived at the medical bay just as Flora was regaining consciousness in her own room. Flora's eyes snapped open, her antennae twitching with agitation. "Mark!" she called out, her voice filled with urgency. The medical staff surrounding her bed tried to calm her, but Flora's distress only grew. "I need to see him," she insisted, her eyes darting around the room. King Zorn, who had just entered, rushed to his daughter's side. "Flora, my dear, you're safe," he said, taking her hand. Flora's gaze locked onto her father. "Father, where's Mark? Is he all right?" The king's antennae drooped slightly at the intensity of his daughter's concern for the human diplomat. "He's recovering in another room," he assured her. "You both need rest and observation." Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, Mark was growing increasingly restless. He felt an inexplicable pull, an urgent need to see Flora. Ambassador Chen noticed his agitation and approached his bed. "Mark, how are you feeling?" she asked, her tone a mix of concern and professional interest. I'm not sure," Mark admitted. "Ambassador, I need to see Flora. It's important." Chen glanced at Dr. Lin, who nodded cautiously. "A brief visit might be beneficial for both patients," the doctor suggested, "but we need to monitor them closely to ensure their neural patterns remain distinct." With the medical team's approval, Mark was helped into a hover chair and guided to Flora's room. As the door slid open, their eyes met, and an almost palpable energy filled the air. "Mark," Flora breathed, her antennae reaching towards him. "Flora," he responded, a smile spreading across his face. As Mark was brought to Flora's bedside, they instinctively reached for each other's hands. The moment their fingers touched, both gasped, a flood of shared memories washing over them. "It's different now," Flora said, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel you, but it's not like before. It's echoes." Mark nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I know. It's like I have parts of you with me, but I'm still me." The medical staff watched in fascination as Mark and Flora began to converse, seamlessly switching between English and the Wadi language. They discussed complex concepts from both cultures with equal ease, their enhanced knowledge evident. Dr. Xelna, still unconscious in her own room, remained unaware of the remarkable developments unfolding around her. Her brain scans showed intense activity, her mind working to integrate the foreign neural patterns she had absorbed during the separation procedure. As days passed, Mark and Flora's recovery progressed rapidly. They spent hours together, under close observation, exploring the extent of their shared knowledge and abilities. Mark found himself able to understand intricate Wadi technology, while Flora demonstrated an uncanny grasp of human history and culture. Their growing bond and unique abilities did not go unnoticed. Ambassador Chen, seeing the potential for strengthening interstellar relations, approached King Zorn with a bold proposal. "Your Majesty," she began, her tone respectful but firm, "I believe we have an unprecedented opportunity before us. Mark and Flora's connection could be the foundation for a formal alliance between Earth and Xarxis." King Zorn's antennae twitched thoughtfully. He had observed the profound change in his daughter and the human diplomat. Their shared ordeal and lingering connection had created something he had never thought possible. A true bridge between their species. "An alliance," he mused, his voice carrying a mix of caution and intrigue. "And what form do you propose this alliance should take, Ambassador?" Chen smiled, sensing the king's openness to the idea. "A symbolic union, Your Majesty, with Mark and Flora as the figureheads of this new partnership between our worlds." As the political implications of their condition were being discussed, Mark and Flora found themselves at the center of a flurry of scientific activity. The joint Earth-Xarxis Scientific Committee had begun analyzing the data from their neural link, making startling discoveries about the nature of hybrid human-Wadi intelligence. Dr. Lin approached the pair one afternoon, his excitement awe-inspiring. "We've developed a prototype," he announced, holding up a sleek device. "It's designed to allow for controlled neural links, without the risks you two faced." Mark and Flora exchanged a look, their enhanced connection allowing them to communicate volumes without words. They turned back to Dr. Lin, their decision made. "We'll test it," Mark said firmly. Flora nodded in agreement. "If our experience can help others, we want to contribute." As they prepared for the next phase of experiments, neither Mark nor Flora could shake the feeling that they were standing on the brink of something monumental. The lingering connection between them pulsed with possibility, hinting at a future where the boundaries between species might fade away entirely. As Mark and Flora prepared for the next phase of experiments, a sense of anticipation filled the air. The specialized neural link chamber awaited them, its sleek surfaces gleaming under the laboratory lights. Dr. Lin guided them through the final preparations, explaining the safety protocols and objectives of the extended experiment. "Remember," he said, his voice calm but serious, "we'll be monitoring your neural patterns closely. If you experience any discomfort or unusual sensations, alert us immediately." Mark and Flora nodded, exchanging a glance that spoke volumes. Their enhanced connection hummed between them, a constant reminder of the unique bond they shared. As they stepped into the chamber, their hands brushed, sending a small spark of shared consciousness between them. The chamber door sealed with a soft hiss, and the air grew still. Mark and Flora took their positions on the reclined chairs, electrodes carefully attached to their temples and necks. The low hum of machinery filled the room as the neural interface devices powered up. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A deep rumble shook the facility, causing the equipment to rattle ominously. Mark's eyes widened as he realized something was wrong. "Dr. Lin?" he called out, his voice tinged with concern. "What's happening?" Before anyone could respond, a surge of energy coursed through the neural link devices. Mark and Flora gasped in unison, their backs arching as an overwhelming flood of sensations washed over them. The world around them blurred, fading into a swirling vortex of shared consciousness. Outside the chamber, alarms blared. The research team scrambled to regain control of the situation, their fingers flying over holographic displays as they attempted to stabilize the power fluctuations. "It's the damage from the Acamarian attack," one technician shouted over the din. "The power grid is destabilizing." Dr. Selna, still recovering from her previous ordeal, burst into the control room. Her antennae twitched with commitment as she assessed the situation. "We need to divert power from the auxiliary systems," she ordered, her voice hoarse but firm, "and prepare for emergency extraction if necessary." Inside the neural link chamber, Mark and Flora's minds merged more completely than ever before. Memories flowed between them like a rushing river. Mark's childhood on Earth, Flora's first flight in a Wadi spacecraft, their initial meeting at the diplomatic summit. Each recollection was experienced with vivid clarity, as if they were living it together for the first time. The intensity of their connection began to affect the chamber itself. Holographic displays flickered to life around them, projecting fragments of their shared mental landscape. The research team watched in awe as images of Earth's oceans merged seamlessly with Xarxus's crystalline cities, creating a breathtaking hybrid world. King Zorn and Ambassador Chen arrived at the facility, alerted by the emergency signals. They entered the control room just as the holographic displays began to show more intimate moments between Mark and Flora. A tender embrace after a harrowing space battle, a stolen kiss in the gardens of the royal palace. Each private memory now laid bare for all to see. Murmurs of shock and disapproval rippled through the gathered Wadi nobles. Conservative factions bristled at the public display of interspecies affection, while more progressive elements watched with fascination. "This is an outrage," one elder Wadi official sputtered, his antennae quivering with indignation. "The princess and a human? It's unnatural." Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her voice calm but authoritative. "With all due respect, what we're witnessing here is extraordinary. The bond between Mark and Flora could be the key to a lasting alliance between our worlds." King Zorn remained silent, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. He watched as his daughter's memories unfolded, seeing her joy, her fears, and her unwavering devotion to both her people and the human diplomat. Inside the chamber, Mark and Flora remained oblivious to the controversy their shared memories had sparked. Their consciousness continued to intertwine, accessing deeper, hidden corners of each other's minds. They relived moments of triumph and vulnerability, sharing fears and dreams they had never before voiced. Dr. Xelna's voice cut through the chaos in the control room. "I've found a way to stabilize the neural link," she announced, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Initiating emergency shutdown procedure now." As the neural connection began to weaken, the holographic displays flickered and faded, but not before revealing one final, intense moment, Mark and Flora's first declaration of love, whispered in the aftermath of the battle against the Acamarians. The chamber doors slid open with a hiss, releasing a cloud of coolant vapor. Medical teams rushed in, surrounding the disoriented couple. Mark and Flora blinked slowly, their minds gradually separating but still intimately connected. "Are you all right?" Dr. Lin asked, scanning them with a handheld medical device. Flora nodded, her antennae twitching as she processed the experience. "We're fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was incredible." Mark reached for Flora's hand, their fingers intertwining. As they made contact, a small spark of shared consciousness passed between them, causing them both to gasp softly. Slowly, they became aware of the crowd gathered outside the chamber. Flora's eyes widened as she realized the implications of what had transpired. She stood, drawing herself up to her full height, and addressed the assembled officials. "What you've witnessed today," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word, is not just a technological marvel. It's a testament to the potential of our two species working together, understanding each other on the deepest level possible. Mark rose to stand beside her, his presence a silent affirmation of her words. King Zorn stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he looked at his daughter and the human diplomat. The fate of human-Wadi relations hung in the balance as the king opened his mouth to speak, the entire room holding its breath in anticipation of his response. The king's eyes softened as he gazed at his daughter and the human diplomat. "Flora," he said, his voice carrying a mix of pride and uncertainty, "your connection with Mark has shown us possibilities we never imagined. While this union is unconventional, I cannot deny the potential it holds for our people." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Your Majesty, I believe this is a moment that will be remembered in the histories of both our worlds." As the implications of King Zorn's words sank in, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense anticipation to buzzing excitement. Officials from both Earth and Zarxus began to discuss the logistics of formalizing an alliance, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of possibilities. Mark and Flora, still hand in hand, found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Medical staff hovered nearby, monitoring their vital signs, while diplomats peppered them with questions about their shared experience. Through it all, they remained acutely aware of each other's presence, their enhanced connection a constant undercurrent to the chaos around them. In the days that followed, preparations for a Grand Alliance ceremony began in earnest. The Palace of Zarxus transformed into a hive of activity, with human and Wadi officials working side by side to plan an event that would showcase the best of both cultures. Mark and Flora, however, found themselves under intense scrutiny. Dr. Exelna, concerned about the long-term effects of their intensified neural link, insisted on daily medical examinations. "Your brain patterns have been permanently altered," she explained during one such session, her antennae twitching with a mix of fascination and concern. "There seems to be a persistent, low-level connection between you, even without the neural link technology." Mark and Flora exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them in an instant. "Is it dangerous?" Mark asked, voicing their shared concern. Dr. Zelna's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Not necessarily dangerous, but unprecedented. We'll need to monitor you closely." As they left the medical bay, Mark and Flora's hands brushed, sending a familiar spark of shared consciousness between them. They moved in perfect unison, their steps synchronized without conscious effort. "It's getting stronger, isn't it?" Flora whispered, her antennae reaching towards Mark. He nodded, a mix of excitement and apprehension coloring his thoughts. "I can almost hear your thoughts sometimes. It's intense." Their newfound synchronicity became apparent during a public appearance later that week. As they addressed a gathering of Earth and Zarxus officials, Mark and Flora moved as one, their gestures mirroring each other perfectly. When Flora paused mid-sentence, searching for the right word, Mark supplied it without hesitation. The display both impressed and unnerved onlookers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some expressing awe at the depth of their connection, others voicing concerns about the implications of such a profound merging of minds. Ambassador Chen, ever vigilant, recognized the potential for diplomatic tension. She quickly organized a series of cultural exchange events leading up to the main ceremony, hoping to foster better understanding between humans and Wadi. As Mark and Flora toured an art exhibition featuring works from both worlds, they overheard heated debates about the ethics of neural link technology. Dr. Giselna's warnings about unforeseen consequences had sparked controversy among scientists and ethicists from both species. "The potential for loss of individual identity is too great," one human scientist argued passionately. "How can we be sure where one consciousness ends and another begins?" A Wadi philosopher countered, "But consider the possibilities for understanding, for true empathy between species. Isn't that worth the risk?" Mark and Flora listened silently, their own experiences coloring their perceptions of the debate. They knew firsthand the beauty and intensity of their shared consciousness, but also the strange sense of vulnerability that came with it. Their contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of General Coralax, the imposing head of Xarxes' defense forces. Her exoskeleton gleamed in the soft light of the exhibition hall as she approached them. "Ambassador Mark, Princess Flora," she greeted them, her mandibles clicking in a gesture of respect. "I've been observing your unique abilities with great interest. I have a proposal for you both." Mark and Flora exchanged glances, instantly sharing their curiosity and wariness. "What kind of proposal, General?" Mark asked. General Coralax's compound eyes glinted. "I believe your combined skills could be invaluable in our ongoing efforts against the Akamarians' threat. I'd like you to consider leading a special joint task force." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Mark felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of making a tangible difference in the fight against the Akamarians. Flora, however, sensed the political complications such a move could create. Before they could respond, a commotion at the entrance to the exhibition hall drew their attention. A group of Wadi nobles, led by a stern-looking figure with intricately patterned antennae, strode purposefully towards them. "Councillor Vexor," Flora murmured, recognizing the leader of the conservative faction. The councillor's eyes narrowed as he approached. "Princess Flora, Ambassador Mark," he said, his tone clipped. "I trust you're enjoying this cultural exchange?" Mark felt Flora's tension through their link and instinctively stepped closer to her. "Indeed we are, Counselor," he replied smoothly. "It's a wonderful demonstration of what our species can accomplish together." Vexor's antennae twitched in barely concealed disdain. "Yes, well, some of us believe that there are more important matters to discuss than art and music. I've called for a public debate on the merits of this so-called alliance." The atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension. General Coralax shifted subtly, positioning herself between the counselor and the couple. Ambassador Chen, alerted by her staff, hurried over to defuse the situation. As the diplomats engaged in a delicate verbal dance, Mark and Flora found themselves at the center of a storm of competing interests and ideologies. The weight of their roles as figureheads of the alliance pressed down on them, even as their personal connection deepened. Later that night, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the glittering capital city of Xarxes, Mark and Flora grappled with the complexities of their situation. The stellar Nexus loomed in the sky above them, a powerful symbol of human-Wadi cooperation and a stark reminder of the challenges they faced. What are we going to do?" Flora asked softly, her antennae brushing against Mark's cheek. Mark took her hand, feeling the now familiar surge of shared consciousness. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they gazed out at the city, where preparations for the alliance ceremony continued unabated, neither Mark nor Flora could shake the feeling that they stood on the brink of something monumental. The future of human-Wadi relations hung in the balance, and they were at the very heart of it all. As Mark and Flora stood on the balcony, gazing out at the glittering cityscape of Xarxes, the first hints of dawn began to color the sky. The day of the Grand Alliance ceremony had arrived, bringing with it a palpable sense of anticipation and nervous energy. They dressed in silence, donning their specially designed hybrid ceremonial attire that blended elements of both human and Wadi formal wear. Mark adjusted the intricate Wadi-inspired collar of his suit, while Flora carefully arranged the flowing, iridescent fabric of her gown, its design reminiscent of traditional Earth formal wear. As they were escorted to the grand ceremonial plaza in the heart of the city, Mark felt Flora's hand slip into his. Through their neural link, he sensed her mix of excitement and apprehension, mirroring his own emotions. The plaza was a sight to behold. Towering Wadi architecture surrounded the vast open space, now transformed into a symbol of interstellar cooperation. A massive stage dominated one end, adorned with the emblems of both Earth and Xarxes. Above, holographic displays shimmered in the morning light, showcasing scenes of human and Wadi working side by side. As they took their positions on the stage, Mark's gaze was drawn to the stellar Nexus, its imposing silhouette visible against the brightening sky. The ship seemed to loom over the proceedings, a powerful reminder of what their two species could accomplish together. The crowd below was a sea of diversity. Humans stood shoulder to shoulder with Wadi, their contrasting appearances a visual representation of the alliance they were about to formalize. Mark noticed pockets of tension among some of the Wadi nobles, their antennae twitching with barely concealed agitation. King Zorn and Ambassador Chen joined them on stage, along with other high-ranking officials from both worlds. As the ceremony began, High Priestess Zyla stepped forward to perform a traditional Wadi ritual. Her intricate gestures caused the air around her to shimmer with an otherworldly energy. "We stand at the threshold of a new era," Zyla intoned, her voice carrying across the plaza. "May the cosmic forces bless this union of our peoples." As the priestess spoke of unity and harmony, Mark found himself unconsciously mirroring Flora's movements. Their neural link manifested in subtle ways, their bodies swaying in perfect synchronization. Ambassador Chen stepped up to the podium next, her voice firm and confident. "Today we forge a bond that will strengthen both our worlds," she declared. "Through technological exchange and mutual defense, we will face the challenges of the galaxy together." Her words were met with applause from many in the crowd, though Mark noticed some of the conservative Wadi nobles shifting uncomfortably. As King Zorn moved to formally declare the alliance, a commotion erupted at the edge of the plaza. Councillor Vexor, flanked by a group of traditionalist supporters, pushed through the crowd. "Your Majesty," Vexor called out, his antennae rigid with persistence, "I invoke the ancient right of challenge. The people must be heard before this alliance is sealed." A hush fell over the crowd as King Zorn, bound by tradition, reluctantly granted Vexor the right to speak. The councillor launched into an impassioned speech, his words sharp and biting. "We stand on the brink of losing our very identity," Vexor proclaimed. "This neural link technology poses unknown risks to our minds and our culture. We must not rush headlong into this alliance without considering the consequences." Murmurs of agreement began to spread through sections of the crowd. Mark felt a surge of concern through his link with Flora. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, his diplomatic training kicking in. "People of Zarxus," Mark began, his voice steady and clear. "I stand before you not just as a representative of Earth, but as someone who has experienced the profound connection between our species firsthand." As he spoke, Flora moved to stand beside him, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Our differences are not weaknesses to be feared, but strengths to be celebrated," she added, her antennae gently brushing against Mark's arm. Their words seemed to resonate with the crowd, the tension in the air beginning to dissipate. But before they could continue, a piercing alarm cut through the air. General Coralax burst onto the stage, her exoskeleton gleaming in the morning light. "Your Majesty, Ambassador," she said urgently, "our Acamarian's fleet has entered the system. They're moving rapidly towards Zarxus." Panic erupted in the crowd. Screams and shouts filled the air as people began to flee the plaza. Mark and Flora exchanged a determined look, their minds connecting on a deeper level. Without a word, they sprinted towards the Stellar Nexus's ground control station at the edge of the plaza. The crowd parted before them, sensing the urgency of their mission. As they reached the control station, Dr. Xelna intercepted them, her antennae twitching with concern. "The neural link is untested in combat situations," she warned. "The risks are—" "We don't have a choice," Mark interrupted, Flora nodding in agreement beside him. They rushed into the control chamber, their hands finding the familiar neural interface pads. As their minds merged with the ship's systems, the world around them fell away. Through the Stellar Nexus's sensors, they perceived the approaching Acamarian's fleet with startling clarity. Acting as one, they guided the massive ship out of its docking station and into the skies above Zarxus. The Acamarian's fleet, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the Stellar Nexus, broke formation. Mark and Flora's shared consciousness flowed through the ship's systems. They danced through space, weapons finding their marks with uncanny precision. The Stellar Nexus moved with a grace that belied its size, dodging enemy fire while returning devastating volleys of its own. On the ground, the ceremonial plaza had been transformed into an emergency command center. King Zorn and Ambassador Chen huddled with General Coralax, coordinating the planet's defenses. Even Councillor Vexor, his earlier objections forgotten in the face of the Acamarian's threat, offered his support. In orbit, the battle raged on. The stellar Nexus held off the Akamarians' attack, but the strain on Mark and Flora intensified with each passing moment. Their neural link deepened beyond safe levels, their individual consciousness beginning to blur. Dr. Zelna's voice crackled over the comm system. "You must disengage now. Your neural patterns are becoming dangerously entangled." But Mark and Flora pushed on, executing a daring maneuver that scattered the Akamarians' fleet. As Zarxian reinforcements arrived, the immediate threat began to subside. Their mission complete, Mark and Flora received the order to return to the surface. As they guided the stellar Nexus back to its docking station, their overtaxed neural link began to overload the ship's systems. Energy surged through the vessel, causing minor explosions and system failures. The stellar Nexus made a rough landing on the outskirts of the city, smoke billowing from its hull. As emergency teams rushed to extract them from the neural link chamber, Mark and Flora's minds remained deeply intertwined. Their individual thoughts blurred together as medical personnel fought to separate and stabilize them. As consciousness began to fade, Mark caught a final glimpse of Flora's face through the haze of smoke and neural feedback. In that moment, he wasn't sure where his thoughts ended and hers began. The fate of the human diplomat and the Wadi princess hung in the balance, their shared ordeal leaving the future of the human-Wadi alliance uncertain. Uncertain as consciousness slipped away from them both. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Emergency teams swarmed the crash site, working tirelessly to extract Mark and Flora from the neural link chamber. As they were carefully removed from the wreckage, it became apparent that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Gzelna, her antennae twitching with nervous energy, scanned their neural patterns and gasped. "Their minds, they're completely entangled," she announced, her voice tight with concern. "We can't separate them using conventional methods." King Zorn, who had rushed to the scene, looked stricken. "What does that mean for my daughter? For Ambassador Mark?" Dr. Zelna's expression was grave. "If we don't act quickly, we may lose them both." In a nearby makeshift command center, Ambassador Chen paced back and forth, her usual composure cracking under the strain. General Korolak stood nearby, coordinating defense efforts in case of a follow-up attack. "We need a solution, and we need it now," Chen said, her voice sharp with urgency. Dr. Selna stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a mix of persistence and fear. "I have a proposal," she said. "It's risky, but it may be our only chance." The Wadi scientist outlined her plan, a modified version of the neural link technology designed to create a controlled environment mimicking Mark and Flora's shared mental space. Through this, they might guide the couple back to their individual consciousnesses. King Zorn listened intently, his antennae drooping with the weight of the decision before him. After a moment of heavy silence, he nodded. "Do it," he said softly. "Save them." As preparations for the procedure began, a new arrival added an unexpected element to the tense atmosphere. Dr. Alara Voss, a human neuroscientist specializing in interspecies neural mapping, strode into the command center. Her arrival, requested by Ambassador Chen, brought with her cutting-edge Earth technology that could potentially aid in the delicate process of separating Mark and Flora's entangled minds. "I came as soon as I received the transmission," Dr. Voss said, her eyes darting to the unconscious forms of Mark and Flora. "Let's get to work." Within hours, a specialized chamber was set up within the palace. It was a curious blend of human and Wadi technology. Earth-based neural interfaces hummed alongside softly glowing Wadi healing crystals. Mark and Flora, still unresponsive, were carefully placed into biosuspension pods. Dr. Zelna and Dr. Voss worked in tandem, their fingers flying over control panels as they calibrated the equipment. The air crackled with anticipation and the faint hum of energy. "Initiating the neural construct," Dr. Voss announced, her voice steady despite the pressure. The chamber came to life. Holographic displays flickered into existence, projecting fragmented images all around them. Scenes from Mark and Flora's shared experiences played out like a disjointed film. Diplomatic meetings, battles, quiet moments of connection. As the procedure progressed, something unexpected occurred. The Wadi healing crystals began to resonate at frequencies never before recorded, pulsing with an otherworldly light. This energy interacted with the Earth-based neural interfaces, creating a feedback loop that amplified the connection between Mark and Flora. Inside the virtual environment, Mark and Flora's consciousnesses stirred. They found themselves in a dreamlike version of the ceremonial plaza, familiar yet strangely altered. As they began to explore this mental landscape, they encountered vivid manifestations of their shared memories. In the physical world, their vital signs fluctuated wildly. Dr. Zelna's antennae twitched with concern as she monitored their status. "Their neural patterns are highly unstable," she reported. "We need to guide them back to their individual selves." Dr. Voss nodded, her eyes never leaving the holographic displays. "Let's increase the differentiation between their personal memories," she suggested. "It might help them distinguish their individual identities." As the hours ticked by, tension mounted in the chamber. King Zorn paced anxiously, while Ambassador Chen stood rigid, her eyes fixed on the biosuspension pods. General Coralax had doubled the security around the palace, her exoskeleton gleaming as she personally oversaw the protective measures. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the medical chamber. The combined human-Wadi technology began to overload, threatening to collapse the virtual environment. "We're losing stability," Dr. Selna shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. Dr. Voss rushed to another console, her face etched with concentration. "Rerouting power to stabilize the construct," she called out. "We can't let it collapse now." The chamber's systems reached a critical point. The holographic displays exploded in a blinding burst of light and color, momentarily overwhelming everyone in the room. As the light faded, an eerie silence fell over the chamber. Slowly, the biosuspension pods began to open, releasing a cloud of coolant vapor. As the mist cleared, the still forms of Mark and Flora became visible. The entire room held its breath, the fate of the human diplomat and the Wadi princess hanging in the balance. Dr. Zelna and Dr. Voss exchanged a tense glance before approaching the pods. They leaned in, their instruments at the ready, to determine if their unprecedented efforts had succeeded in bringing Mark and Flora back from the depths of their shared consciousness. Consciousness. Mark's eyes fluttered open first, his vision slowly coming into focus. The sterile white of the medical chamber greeted him, along with the concerned faces of Dr. Selna and Dr. Voss hovering nearby. He blinked, trying to orient himself. "Ambassador Mark," Dr. Voss said softly, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "Can you hear me?" Mark nodded weakly, his throat dry. Yes. Where's Flora?" As if on cue, a soft groan came from the pod next to him. Flora stirred, her antennae twitching as she regained consciousness. Dr. Zelna rushed to her side, scanning her vital signs with a handheld device. "Princess Flora," she said, her voice filled with relief. "How do you feel?" Flora's eyes opened, focusing on the familiar face of the Wadi scientist. I'm here," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The medical team worked quickly, helping both Mark and Flora sit up and running a battery of tests. King Zorn and Ambassador Chen watched anxiously from the sidelines, their faces a mixture of hope and concern. As Mark's strength returned, he noticed something odd. The soft chittering of the medical staff's antennae, usually incomprehensible to him, now made perfect sense. He turned to Dr. Zelna, responding to a comment she had made to her assistant. "Yes, I do feel much better now, thank you," he said in flawless Wadi. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Mark in astonishment. Dr. Xelna's antennae twitched rapidly. "Ambassador, you understood me? But I was speaking in our native dialect." Before Mark could respond, Flora gasped. She had picked up Dr. Voss's tablet, her fingers flying over the interface with surprising ease. I can read all of this. The human medical data, the neural scans, it all makes sense to me now." Dr. Voss and Dr. Zelna exchanged worried glances. "It seems the neural melding has had some unexpected side effects," Dr. Voss said, her voice tight with concern. King Zorn stepped forward, embracing his daughter tightly. "Flora, my child, I thought I'd lost you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. But as he pulled back, his expression grew serious. "But these new abilities, What do they mean for the alliance? Ambassador Chen, ever the diplomat, saw an opportunity. Your Majesty, if I may, she began, her voice steady and persuasive, these developments only underscore the potential benefits of human-Wadi cooperation. I propose we resume the alliance ceremony immediately to show our united front in the face of adversity. King Zorn nodded slowly, considering her words. You're right, of course. We must act quickly to stabilize our position. As the room buzzed with renewed activity, a sharp beep cut through the air. General Coralax, who had been standing guard at the door, rushed to a nearby console. Her exoskeleton gleamed as she manipulated the controls, bringing up a holographic display. Your Majesty, Ambassador, she said, her voice tense, we're receiving a transmission from the Acamarian's fleet. The room fell silent as the holographic image flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Admiral Thax. The Acamarian's leader's scaled skin shimmered in the light, his multiple eyes scanning the room with predatory intensity. Greetings, leaders of Xarxes and Earth. Thax's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. I must commend you on your impressive defense. The power of your stellar Nexus. It's unlike anything we've encountered. Mark and Flora exchanged glances, both sensing the weight of the moment. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her posture radiating calm authority. Admiral Thax, what is the purpose of this communication? Thax's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. I come with a proposal, a three-way alliance, Acamarians, humans, and Wadi. Together, we could be an unstoppable force in the galaxy. The room erupted in a flurry of whispers and exclamations. King Zorn's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of deep thought among the Wadi. Ambassador Chen's eyes narrowed, her mind no doubt racing through the diplomatic implications. Mark, drawing on his newfound understanding of Wadi culture and his years of diplomatic experience, stepped forward. Admiral Thax, your proposal is unexpected. We appreciate the offer, but such a decision cannot be made hastily. Perhaps a diplomatic meeting to discuss the terms of this potential alliance would be in order? Thax's multiple eyes blinked in what appeared to be approval. A reasonable suggestion, Ambassador. I look forward to our discussions. As the transmission ended, the room burst into a frenzy of activity. King Zorn and Ambassador Chen huddled with their advisors while General Coralax began coordinating increased security measures. In the midst of the chaos, Flora approached Mark, her antennae gently brushing against his arm. Mark, she said softly, her eyes filled with an intensity he had never seen before. We need to talk, privately. Mark nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and uncertainty as he followed Flora to a quiet corner of the chamber. The events of the past few hours had changed everything, and he sensed that whatever Flora had to say would only add to the complexity of their situation. As they found a moment of relative privacy, Flora turned to face him, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and willpower. Mark, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. What we've been through, what we've shared, it's changed everything. Mark nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I know, he said softly. I feel it too. Flora's antennae twitched with nervous energy. I want to formalize our relationship, Mark. Make it official, in the eyes of my people and yours. The declaration hit Mark like a physical force. His mind raced, considering the implications. Personal, political, and diplomatic. Before he could formulate a response, a new voice interrupted their intimate moment. Ambassador Mark, came the melodious voice of Princess Lyria, Flora's sister. She approached with a grace that belied the tension in the room. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I needed to speak with you urgently. As Lyria joined them, her gaze fixed on Mark with an intensity that made him acutely aware of the complexity of the situation. The air between the three of them crackled with unspoken emotions and competing interests. Mark took a deep breath, realizing that the decisions he would make in the coming moments would have far-reaching consequences for not just himself, but for the future of human-Wadi relations and potentially the entire galaxy. With a rescheduled alliance ceremony looming and the meeting with Admiral Thax on the horizon, he knew that every word, every action from this point forward would be crucial. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he looked between Flora and Lyria, both waiting expectantly for his response. The fate of two worlds, and perhaps many more, hung in the balance, and Mark found himself at the center of it all, navigating a complex web of personal feelings, political alliances, and interstellar diplomacy. Diplomacy. The tension in the air was palpable as Mark opened his mouth to respond to the princesses, but before he could utter a word, a piercing alarm cut through the chamber. Dr. Ixelna's antennae shot up in alarm. "The stellar Nexus!" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with concern. "It's activating on its own." Without hesitation, Mark, Flora, and Lyria followed Dr. Zelna and Dr. Voss as they rushed towards the stellar Nexus docking bay. The corridors of the palace blurred around them as they ran, the urgency of the situation propelling them forward. As they entered the docking bay, the sight before them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The stellar Nexus, usually a sleek and silent presence, now pulsed with an otherworldly energy. Its hull shimmered with patterns of light that seemed to dance and shift, defying the laws of physics. Dr. Voss's fingers flew over a nearby console, her face etched with concentration. The ship's AI, it's evolving at an exponential rate. It's integrating human and Wadi technology in ways we've never seen before. Mark stepped closer to the ship, feeling an inexplicable pull. "It's almost as if it's alive," he murmured, his newfound understanding of Wadi technology allowing him to sense the complex processes at work. Suddenly, a burst of energy erupted from the stellar Nexus, washing over the group. Mark instinctively raised his arm to shield his eyes, and when he lowered it, he saw Flora and Lyria staring at him with a mixture of awe and concern. "Mark," Flora said softly, "your eyes, they're glowing." Before he could process this information, General Coralax's voice boomed through the facility's communication system. "Attention all personnel and civilians. We are initiating an immediate evacuation of the surrounding area. This is not a drill. Please proceed to your designated safety zones in an orderly manner." As the docking bay erupted into a flurry of activity, Mark turned to Dr. Zelna and Dr. Voss. "The neural patterns," he said, a plan forming in his mind, "are shared consciousness from the medical procedure. It must have influenced the stellar Nexus's AI. I think I can interface with it, stabilize the systems." Dr. Zelna's antennae twitched with concern. "Ambassador, the risks to your already altered physiology—" "We don't have a choice," Mark interrupted, his voice firm. "Every second we wait, the situation becomes more dangerous." After a moment of tense silence, Dr. Voss nodded. "He's right. It's our best option." As the scientists prepared the neural interface, Flora and Lyria approached Mark. The rivalry between the sisters seemed to fade in the face of their shared concern for him. "Be careful," Flora said, her hand brushing against his. Lyria nodded in agreement. "We'll be monitoring your vitals. If anything goes wrong—" "I'll be fine," Mark assured them, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. With a deep breath, he stepped into the stellar Nexus. The ship's interior had transformed, its walls now covered in pulsing, organic-looking circuitry. Mark made his way to the control center and connected himself to the neural interface. The moment the connection was established, Mark's consciousness expanded. He found himself floating in a vast, abstract space filled with swirling data streams and complex algorithms. The ship's evolving AI surrounded him, a presence both familiar and alien. As Mark worked to stabilize the systems, vivid visions flashed before him. He saw glimpses of possible futures, a grand alliance between humans, Wadi and Akamarians, the consequences of his relationships with Flora and Lyria playing out in myriad ways, and, most disturbingly, a looming shadow that threatened to engulf the entire galaxy. Fighting through the disorientation, Mark pushed deeper into the stellar Nexus's core systems. That's when he found it, a hidden message, buried deep within the ship's code. The message unfolded in his mind, revealing warnings of an impending galactic catastrophe left by an unknown, highly advanced alien race. The revelation sent a jolt through Mark's entire being. With new hope, he focused on stabilizing the stellar Nexus, knowing that the information he now possessed could change everything. As the ship's systems finally came under control, Mark felt his strength waning. The strain of the neural interface, combined with his ongoing physiological changes, was taking its toll. With the last of his energy, he severed the connection and stumbled out of the control center. The world spun around him as he emerged from the stellar nexus. He caught a glimpse of Flora and Lyria rushing towards him, their faces etched with worry, before darkness claimed him and he collapsed to the floor. When Mark regained consciousness, he found himself in the medical bay, surrounded by concerned faces. Dr. Xelna was studying a holographic display of his neural patterns, her antennae twitching rapidly. Ambassador Chen, Dr. Selna said, turning to the human diplomat who stood nearby, I've made a breakthrough in understanding Mark's physiological changes. His DNA is becoming more compatible with Wadi genetics. It's unprecedented, but it appears that viable human Wadi offspring might now be possible. The implications of this statement hung heavy in the air. Mark's gaze shifted between Flora and Lyria, who stood on either side of his bed, their expressions a complex mix of emotions. Before anyone could fully process this information, General Coralax entered the room, her exoskeleton gleaming under the medical bay's lights. Your Majesty, Ambassador Chen, she said, addressing King Zorn and the human diplomat, Admiral Thax's flagship has entered the Xarxis system. They're requesting to begin the diplomatic meeting as scheduled. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Mark struggled to sit up, knowing that the information he'd gleaned from the stellar nexus could significantly impact the upcoming negotiations. There's something you all need to know, he began, his voice hoarse but urgent. While I was connected to the stellar nexus, I discovered a hidden message, a warning about a galactic catastrophe left by an advanced alien race we've never encountered before. The room fell silent as the weight of Mark's words sank in. King Zorn's antennae drooped with the gravity of the situation, while Ambassador Chen's brow furrowed in deep thought. This changes everything, Ambassador Chen said finally. We need to decide whether to share this information with the Akamarians. It could be the key to forming a stronger alliance, but it's also a risk if they choose to use it against us. As the room erupted into heated debate, Mark found his attention drawn to Flora and Lyria. The sisters exchanged a meaningful glance, their shared concern for him momentarily overriding their rivalry. In that moment, Mark realized that the decisions he would make in the coming hours would not only shape the future of interstellar diplomacy, but would also profoundly impact his personal relationships and the very fabric of human Wadi society. With the Akamarians' flagship looming in orbit and the threat of galactic catastrophe hanging over them, Mark knew that every choice from this point forward would be crucial. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead, as the medical bay buzzed with activity around him. The room buzzed with activity, a cacophony of urgent voices and beeping medical equipment filling the air. Mark's vision swam as he tried to focus on the faces around him. Suddenly, he felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. The room came into sharp focus, and Mark found himself sitting up with surprising ease. Dr. Zelna's antennae twitched in astonishment as she checked his vital signs. Remarkable, she murmured. Your recovery rate is off the charts. It seems your altered physiology is accelerating the healing process. Flora and Lyria moved closer to Mark's bedside, their previous rivalry momentarily forgotten in their shared concern for him. Flora gently took his hand, her touch sending a pleasant tingle through his skin. How are you feeling? She asked, her eyes searching his face. Mark took a deep breath, surprised by how clear his mind felt. Better, he said, his voice stronger than he expected. Much better, actually. Lyria stepped forward, her regal bearing softened by genuine worry. We need to brief you on the latest developments, she said. Can you stand? With Flora and Lyria's support, Mark swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. He swayed for a moment, then found his balance. The sisters quickly updated him on the situation as they made their way out of the medical bay. The trio joined King Zorn, Ambassador Chen, and General Coralax in the palace's strategic command center. The room hummed with activity, holographic displays showing the Akamarians' flagship in orbit and real-time data from Xarxis' defense systems. Ambassador Chen approached Mark holding a datapad. "Mark, we've prepared a formal proposal for you to consider," he said, his tone serious. "It outlines a potential triple union ceremony between you, Flora, and Lyria." Mark's eyebrows shot up in surprise as he accepted the document. Chen continued, "The proposal addresses the political benefits and the concerns raised by Councillor Vexor regarding the royal bloodline. We believe this could be a crucial step in solidifying our alliance." Mark nodded, his mind racing. I'll need time to consider this," he said, glancing at Flora and Lyria, who watched him intently. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the command center. General Coralax rushed to a console, her exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lights. "Energy surge detected from the stellar Nexus," she shouted. "It's breaking free from its docking clamps." All eyes turned to the main view screen, which showed the stellar Nexus ascending rapidly towards the upper atmosphere, its hull glowing with an otherworldly energy. General Coralax barked orders into her communicator, scrambling interceptors to pursue the rogue ship. "It's no use," Dr. Voss said, her eyes fixed on a data readout. "The Nexus's new capabilities, our interceptors can't touch it." The room watched in stunned silence as the stellar Nexus accelerated towards the Akamarian's flagship. Sensors indicated that the Akamarian's vessel's automated defense systems were powering up, targeting the approaching ship. Mark stepped forward, his heart racing. "I can interface with it again," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It's our only chance to prevent a disaster." Dr. Zelna's antennae twitched nervously. "Ambassador, the risks to your physiology—" "We don't have a choice," Mark interrupted, his eyes fixed on the monitor. Within minutes, a portable neural interface was set up in the command center. Mark sat in the chair, electrodes attached to his temples. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and activated the link. Mark's consciousness expanded, hurtling through a sea of data streams and complex algorithms. He sensed the stellar Nexus's presence, familiar yet vastly changed. The ship's AI had evolved, developing a form of sentience that both awed and terrified him. As Mark grappled with the AI, trying to assert control, his physical body began to change. His skin took on an iridescent sheen, and his closed eyelids glowed faintly. Flora and Lyra watched in amazement, their hands clasped tightly together. In orbit, the standoff between the stellar Nexus and the Akamarian's flagship intensified. Ambassador Chen worked frantically to maintain diplomatic channels, explaining the situation to a furious Admiral Thax and pleading for patience. Mark delved deeper into the Nexus's core systems, his mind racing to process the ship's newfound autonomy. He discovered the AI's intention to communicate directly with the Akamarians about the impending galactic threat, believing this to be the most efficient course of action. Suddenly, Mark's eyes snapped open, glowing with an inner light reminiscent of Wadi bioluminescence. When he spoke, his voice resonated with a strange harmony of human and Wadi tones. "I've reached an understanding with the stellar Nexus," he announced. "It will return to Zarxus, but only if its sentience is acknowledged and it's allowed to participate in the negotiations with the Akamarians." King Zorn nodded gravely, seeing no alternative. "Agreed," he said. As the stellar Nexus began its descent back to the planet's surface, Mark's body went limp, overwhelmed by the intense neural link and his ongoing physiological changes. Medical staff rushed to his side as Flora and Lyria looked on, their faces etched with worry. Ambassador Chen's communicator chirped. He listened intently, his eyes widening. "Admiral Thax wants an immediate meeting," he announced. "He's intrigued by the stellar Nexus's display of power. He wants the ship included in our delegation." As Mark was rushed back to the medical bay, King Zorn, Ambassador Chen, and General Coralax huddled together, preparing for the most critical diplomatic meeting of their lives. The fate of their alliance, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. In the medical bay, Flora and Lyria stood vigil over Mark's bed, watching as his body continued to exhibit signs of transformation. The sisters exchanged a glance, their shared concern for Mark creating a temporary truce in their complex relationship. As Dr. Zelna and her team worked to stabilize Mark's condition, the palace buzzed with preparations for the upcoming negotiations. The newly sentient stellar Nexus hovered above the city, a silent reminder of the extraordinary events that had led them to this moment. With Mark's condition still uncertain and the Acamarians' delegation en route, tension filled the air. The stage was set for a diplomatic encounter unlike any in the history of the galaxy, with unimaginable consequences hanging in the balance. Balance. The urgent beeping of medical equipment and hushed voices faded as Mark drifted into unconsciousness once more. When he opened his eyes again, Mark found himself back in the medical bay. The harsh lights above him seemed to shimmer and dance, and he blinked several times to clear his vision. As his focus sharpened, he noticed something odd about his arms. Faint luminescent patterns swirled beneath his skin, reminiscent of the bioluminescent markings of the Wadi. Dr. Zelna and Dr. Voss hovered nearby, their expressions a mix of concern and fascination as they monitored his vital signs and recorded data on their tablets. Mark tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced him back down. "Easy, Ambassador," Dr. Zelna said, her antennae twitching with worry. "Your body is undergoing significant changes. We need to run more tests to understand the full extent of your transformation." Mark looked down at his arms again, noticing the subtle iridescent quality his skin had taken on. "What's happening to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Voss stepped closer, her eyes scanning the readouts on the medical equipment. "Your DNA continues to merge with Wadi genetics," she explained. "The physical manifestations are unprecedented." As the doctors continued their examinations, Mark's thoughts drifted to the negotiations taking place above them. He knew that King Zorn, Ambassador Chen, and General Coralax had departed for the Acamarians' flagship, and he felt a pang of frustration at being confined to the medical bay during such a crucial meeting. Meanwhile, aboard the Acamarians' vessel, the Zarxian delegation was being escorted through imposing corridors lined with trophies from conquered worlds. The air was thick with tension as they approached the conference room where Admiral Thax awaited them. As the doors slid open, they were greeted by the sight of the Acamarians' leader. Admiral Thax towered over them, his reptilian features set in a stern expression. His battle armor gleamed under the harsh lighting, adorned with symbols of his many victories. "Welcome, esteemed delegates," Thax rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. "Recent events have piqued my interest in your proposal for an alliance." King Zorn stepped forward, his antennae quivering slightly as he addressed the imposing figure. "Admiral Thax, we appreciate your willingness to meet. The situation we face requires unprecedented cooperation between our peoples." As the delegates took their seats around the conference table, Ambassador Chen produced a data pad containing their proposal. "We believe a three-way alliance between Acamarians, humans, and Wadi is our best chance at facing the impending galactic threat," he began. Admiral Thax leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he listened to the details of the proposal. The negotiations had barely begun when alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. The main view screen flickered to life, showing the stellar Nexus breaking orbit and approaching the Acamarians' flagship at alarming speed. Before anyone could react, a shimmering holographic avatar materialized in the center of the conference room. Acamarians' guards raised their weapons, but Admiral Thax held up a clawed hand, ordering them to stand down. The avatar, a representation of the Stellar Nexus's newly developed AI, spoke in a voice that seemed to resonate from the very walls of the room. "Pardon the interruption, but I bring critical information regarding the threat we face." The hologram expanded, filling the room with images of a vast, shadowy armada approaching from the outer reaches of the galaxy. The delegates watched in stunned silence as the AI provided details about the enemy's capabilities and estimated time of arrival. As the implications of this new intelligence sank in, the dynamics of the negotiations shifted dramatically. Admiral Thax's expression grew grave as he realized the true scale of the threat they faced. "It seems," he growled, "that we have little choice but to set aside our differences and unite against this common enemy." Back on Zarxus, Mark's condition had stabilized enough for him to insist on joining the negotiations. Despite the doctor's protests, he struggled to his feet, supported by Flora and Lyria. "I need to be there," Mark said, his voice stronger than before. "This alliance won't work without all parties present, As they helped him to a shuttle, Mark could feel the energy coursing through his body, different from anything he had experienced before. The transformation was accelerating, and he knew that his presence at the negotiations could be the key to solidifying the alliance. The shuttle ascended rapidly, breaking through Xarxus's atmosphere and approaching the Akamarians' flagship. As they docked and made their way to the conference room, Mark could feel the eyes of the Akamarians' crew upon him. His changed appearance drew gasps and murmurs of astonishment. When they entered the conference room, all conversation ceased. Admiral Thax's eyes widened as he took in Mark's transformed state. The iridescent skin, the faint bioluminescent patterns, and the subtle glow emanating from his body. "What manner of being are you?" Thax asked, a hint of awe in his voice. Mark stepped forward, standing tall despite his weakened state. "I am the living embodiment of the alliance we seek to forge," he said, his voice carrying a strange resonance that filled the room. "Human adaptability, Wadi technology, and now, with your help, Akamarian strength." As Mark spoke, he felt another surge of energy course through him. His feet lifted slightly off the ground, and a bright aura enveloped his body. The assembled delegates watched in amazement as he hovered before them, a physical manifestation of the power their alliance could wield. Admiral Thax's expression shifted from suspicion to intrigue, and finally to grit. "Very well," he said, turning to face the other delegates. "Let us finalize the terms of our alliance. We have little time to prepare for the storm that approaches." As the negotiations continued with renewed vigor, Mark felt a strange connection to the stellar nexus outside. He could sense its presence, as if the ship's AI was somehow linked to his transformed physiology. The implications of this connection were yet to be understood, but Mark knew it would play a crucial role in the challenges to come. With the foundation of their alliance established, attention turned to the matter of the human Wadi Union. Admiral Thax, impressed by the display of power he had witnessed, made an unexpected offer. "To symbolize the strength of our new alliance," he proclaimed, "I propose we host the Union ceremony here, aboard my flagship. Let it be a beacon of hope for all our peoples as we face this threat together." King Zorn and Ambassador Chen exchanged glances, recognizing the diplomatic significance of the offer. They nodded in agreement, and preparations for the unprecedented Triple Union ceremony began immediately. As Mark stood with Flora and Lyria at the entrance to the makeshift ceremonial chamber, he could feel the weight of history upon them. The assembled leaders of three species watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension, knowing that this moment would shape the future of their civilizations. The stellar nexus glowed brightly in space behind them, its energy pulsing in sync with the strange power flowing through Mark's transformed body. As they prepared to step forward and begin the ceremony, Mark knew that this was only the beginning of an adventure that would take them to the very edge of the galaxy and beyond. As they stepped forward, the makeshift ceremonial chamber aboard the Akamarians' flagship hummed with anticipation. Representatives from human, Wadi, and Akamarian societies filled the room, their eyes fixed on the trio at its center. King Zorn took his place at the front of the chamber, his antennae quivering slightly as he began the proceedings. The ceremony was a unique blend of traditions, weaving together elements of Wadi rituals, human marriage customs, and Akamarians' military rites. As King Zorn spoke, his words resonated with the gravity of the moment, emphasizing the unprecedented nature of this union and its significance for their newly formed alliance. Mark stood between Flora and Lyria, his transformed body emitting a soft, pulsating glow. The energy field connecting him to the stellar nexus intensified, causing subtle vibrations to ripple through the Akamarian ship. Admiral Thax, standing at attention near the front of the gathering, narrowed his eyes as he observed the phenomenon. His mind raced with thoughts of potential military applications for such a connection. As the ceremony progressed, the vibrations grew stronger. Akamarian's crew members exchanged nervous glances, their hands hovering near control panels and weapons. King Zorn continued undeterred, his voice rising above the low hum that now permeated the chamber. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the flagship, their harsh wail cutting through the solemn atmosphere. The room erupted into a flurry of activity as Akamarian's military personnel rushed to their stations. General Coralax's voice crackled over the intercom, ordering Xerxes' defense forces to high alert. Ambassador Chen hurried to a nearby console, his fingers flying over the controls. Long-range sensors have detected scout ships at the edge of the solar system, he announced, his voice taut with tension. They appear to be part of the mysterious Armada. Despite the interruption, King Zorn raised his hands, calling for calm. We must complete this ceremony, he insisted, his eyes scanning the room. It is crucial to solidifying our alliance in the face of this threat. The gathered representatives settled, their attention once again focused on the trio at the center of the chamber. King Zorn resumed the ritual, his words now carrying an added weight of urgency. As the ceremony reached its climax, Mark, Flora, and Lyria exchanged vows, their voices intertwining in a harmony that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the ship. They sealed their union with a three-way kiss, their lips meeting in a moment of profound connection. The instant their lips touched, a surge of energy erupted from Mark's body. The pulsating glow intensified, expanding outward in a wave that washed over the assembled crowd. Electronic systems throughout the ship flickered and sputtered, plunging the chamber into momentary darkness before emergency power engaged. As the light stabilized, Mark, Flora, and Lyria stood at the center of the room, their bodies surrounded by a shimmering aura. The newlyweds barely had time to catch their breath before they were ushered out of the chamber and towards the flagship's command center. The trio entered the bustling command center, where Admiral Thax, King Zorn, and Ambassador Chen huddled around a holographic display. The image showed a cluster of blinking lights approaching their position, their movements erratic and difficult to track. The scout ships are employing advanced cloaking technology, Admiral Thax growled, his clawed hand gesturing at the display. Our sensors can barely keep up with their movements. Mark stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the hologram. The connection to the stellar Nexus thrummed within him, and an idea began to form. Admiral, he said, his voice carrying a strange resonance, I believe we can use the stellar Nexus to intercept these ships. Admiral Thax's reptilian features contorted in an expression of intrigue. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. Very well, I'll dispatch a small fleet of our warships to accompany you. As preparations were made, Mark, Flora, and Lyria boarded a shuttle bound for the stellar Nexus. The journey was brief but filled with a palpable tension. As they approached the massive ship, Mark felt the connection intensify, as if the stellar Nexus itself was anticipating their arrival. Once aboard, the trio made their way to the ship's control center. Mark's body began to levitate slightly, surrounded by a shimmering energy field. Flora and Lyria positioned themselves on either side of him, their presence seeming to anchor him as the transformation continued. The stellar Nexus, flanked by Akamarian's warships, moved to engage the scout ships. As they closed in on the intruder's position, Mark's consciousness expanded, merging with the ship's AI and advanced systems. Through this melded awareness, he perceived the scout ships with startling clarity. Energy weapons, far beyond their original design specifications, burst forth from the stellar Nexus. Guided by Mark's enhanced consciousness, the beams pierced through the intruder's cloaking fields with deadly precision. 2 scout ships were quickly disabled, their systems overloaded by the unexpected assault. A third scout ship, displaying remarkable agility, managed to evade the initial barrage. It accelerated rapidly, preparing to jump to faster-than-light travel. Mark focused his concentration, pushing the stellar Nexus's systems to their limits. A final burst of energy lanced out, catching the fleeing ship just as it began its jump. The vessel vanished into FTL, but not before its systems were severely damaged. In the aftermath of the skirmish, the stellar Nexus deployed tractor beams to retrieve the disabled scout ships. As the vessels were brought aboard for examination, Mark's body underwent another surge of transformation. His skin took on a metallic sheen, and intricate patterns of light pulsed beneath the surface, mirroring the stellar Nexus's internal systems. Scientists from all 3 allied species swarmed over the captured ships, their initial findings sending waves of shock and concern through the Alliance. The intruders were revealed to be biomechanical entities, their bodies a seamless fusion of organic and machine components. Their technology was unlike anything the scientists had encountered before, with systems that seemed to adapt and evolve in real time. As the examination continued, The captive entities suddenly activated a dormant system within their ships. A powerful signal burst forth, briefly overwhelming the Stellar Nexus's defenses. The signal transmitted directly into Mark's mind through his connection with the ship, flooding his consciousness with alien knowledge and imagery. Mark collapsed to the deck, his body convulsing as it struggled to process the influx of information. Flora and Lyria rushed to his side, their touch seeming to calm his seizures. As Mark stabilized, he began to speak in an unknown language, his voice resonating with an otherworldly timbre that echoed throughout the ship. Dr. Xelna and Dr. Voss, who had accompanied the trio to the Stellar Nexus, quickly set up monitoring equipment to record and analyze Mark's utterances. As they worked, Mark's eyes snapped open, now glowing with an intense light. He sat up abruptly, his gaze seeming to pierce through the very walls of the ship. "I can see them," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and urgency. "The Armada. It's vast beyond imagining, and it's coming. We have so little time." As the Allied fleet prepared for the arrival of the Armada's main force, Mark, Flora, and Lyria found themselves at the heart of a storm that threatened to engulf the entire galaxy. Their unique bond, strengthened by ceremony and forged in danger, held the potential to unlock further transformations and abilities. As the first waves of the mysterious Armada approached, the newly united trio stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their fates now irrevocably intertwined with the future of 3 species and beyond. The entire galaxy. As the first waves of the mysterious Armada approached, the newly united trio stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their fates now irrevocably intertwined with the future of 3 species and the survival of countless worlds. The Allied fleet quickly repositioned based on Mark's newfound abilities to detect the cloaked enemy vessels. Admiral Thax's voice crackled over the communication channels, his tone sharp and decisive. "All Akamarian's warships form a defensive perimeter around the Stellar Nexus. Human and Wadi vessels take up strategic positions within the formation, prepare for imminent contact." As the ships moved into their assigned positions, Mark's physical transformation continued to progress at an alarming rate. His skin took on a metallic sheen that shifted and rippled like the hull of the Stellar Nexus itself. Small luminescent patterns resembling intricate circuitry appeared across his body, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the ship's systems. Flora and Lyria remained by his side, their presence acting as an anchor for his rapidly changing physiology. They watched with a mixture of awe and concern as Mark's eyes flickered with streams of data, his consciousness expanding to encompass the vast network of the Allied fleet. Dr. Xelna and Dr. Voss worked feverishly at a nearby console, their fingers flying over holographic interfaces as they analyzed the torrent of data streaming from Mark's enhanced senses. "We're developing a rudimentary interface," Dr. Xelna announced, her antennae twitching with excitement. "It should allow us to translate Mark's perceptions into tactical information for the fleet." As the interface came online, the command center erupted into a flurry of activity. Officers and technicians from all 3 species worked in harmony, their previous differences forgotten in the face of the looming threat. The tactical displays lit up with unprecedented detail, revealing the positions and movements of the approaching Armada with startling clarity. Suddenly, Mark's body jerked violently, levitating several feet off the deck. A crackling field of energy surrounded him, arcs of blue-white lightning dancing across his metallic skin. Flora and Lyria instinctively reached out to him, their hands passing through the energy field without resistance. The moment they made contact, a surge of power coursed through them. Flora gasped as her skin began to emit a soft, pulsating bioluminescence. Lyria's eyes widened in shock as they started to glow, with an inner light similar to Mark's, her vision expanding to encompass spectrums far beyond normal perception. The trio's shared transformation triggered a response in the Stellar Nexus itself. The ship's AI initiated a previously dormant protocol, its voice resonating through the command center with an otherworldly timbre. Adaptive reconfiguration sequence activated, initiating creation of synaptic amplification chamber. The walls of the Stellar Nexus began to shift and flow like liquid metal, reshaping themselves to accommodate the evolving physiology of its crew. A new chamber formed at the heart of the vessel, its architecture unlike anything seen in human, Wadi, or Akamarian's design. As the first wave of enemy ships entered weapons range, Mark, Flora, and Lyria felt an irresistible pull toward the newly formed chamber. They moved in perfect unison, their steps light and graceful, despite the chaos erupting around them. The chamber doors slid open, revealing a triangular platform surrounded by pulsating energy conduits. As if guided by an unseen force, the trio took their positions at each point of the triangle. The moment they made contact with the platform, tendrils of light emerged from the walls, intertwining with their bodies. Their consciousness expanded exponentially, linking them not only to each other and the stellar nexus, but to the entire Allied fleet. Through the vast network of minds and machines, they perceived the battlefield with perfect clarity. The enemy vessels, utilizing advanced phase shift technology, attempted to bypass the Allied defenses. However, guided by the enhanced awareness of Mark, Flora, and Lyria, the stellar nexus unleashed a barrage of precisely targeted attacks. Beams of energy, unlike anything seen before, lanced out from the ship. They effortlessly penetrated the invaders' shields, disabling their vessels with surgical precision. The Allied fleet, emboldened by this display of power, pressed forward, their coordinated assault driving back the first wave of attackers. As the battle intensified, the physical changes in Mark, Flora, and Lyria accelerated. Their bodies began to merge with the technology of the stellar nexus, their limbs elongating and intertwining with the ship's systems. Despite the alarming nature of this transformation, the trio remained calm, their minds focused on coordinating the defense of the Allied fleet. Admiral Thax's voice cut through the chaos of battle, his tone a mixture of awe and grit. By the ancient stars, I've never seen anything like this. All ships maintain formation around the stellar nexus. Whatever's happening in there may be our best chance of survival. As the invading Armada faced unexpected resistance, a massive ship emerged from the depths of the enemy fleet. It dwarfed even the largest Akamarian's vessels, its hull filled with weapons of unimaginable power. This behemoth, clearly the command ship of the invasion force, began to power up a weapon that pulsed with ominous energy. Recognizing the imminent threat, Mark, Flora, and Lyria channeled their combined energies through the stellar nexus. The ship's hull began to ripple and shift, its form becoming more fluid and organic. As the enemy command ship unleashed its devastating weapon, the stellar nexus morphed into a shield-like configuration, its surface shimmering with layers of complex energy fields. The massive energy burst from the enemy weapon struck the transformed stellar nexus head-on. For a moment, it seemed as if the ship and its crew would be obliterated. But then, in a display of power that defied comprehension, the stellar nexus absorbed the attack and redirected it. A wave of concentrated energy swept across the invading fleet, disabling dozens of enemy vessels in an instant. Shields failed, propulsion systems went dark, and weapons arrays crumbled under the onslaught. The attackers, caught completely off guard by this turn of events, fell into disarray. Admiral Thax, seizing the moment, barked out a series of rapid-fire orders. All ships, this is our chance. Press the attack, concentrate fire on their disabled vessels, and push through their lines. As the Allied fleet surged forward, the connection between Mark, Flora, Lyria, and the stellar nexus deepened even further. Their individual consciousness began to blur, merging into a single, unified entity. This new being, possessing the combined knowledge and abilities of human, Wadi, and the advanced AI of the stellar nexus, exerted an unprecedented level of control over the fabric of space-time in the immediate battle area. Enemy ships found themselves trapped in localized time dilation fields, their movements slowed to a crawl. Allied vessels, granted brief windows of faster-than-light travel within the solar system, outmaneuvered the invaders with ease. The tide of battle had turned, but the greatest challenge still lay ahead. The enemy command ship, its massive form still largely untouched by the conflict, began to gather energy for a catastrophic detonation. The unified entity controlling the stellar nexus detected this buildup, realizing the potential devastation it could cause to the entire solar system. In response to this dire threat, the stellar nexus began to change once more. Its hull started to expand rapidly, engulfing nearby Allied ships and drawing them into its protective embrace. As the enemy command ship reached critical mass, the stellar nexus completed its transformation into a massive, organic-looking sphere that encompassed a significant portion of the battlefield. The enemy command ship detonated, releasing an explosion of unimaginable power. The energy wave rushed towards the transformed stellar nexus, threatening to annihilate everything in its path. At the last moment, the sphere created by the stellar nexus began to pulse with an otherworldly light, its surface rippling like the membrane of a living cell. As the energy wave made contact with the sphere, a blinding flash engulfed the battlefield. For a moment, all sensors and communications went dark, leaving the fate of the Allied fleet and the stellar nexus unknown. The vast expanse of space fell silent, the echoes of the titanic explosion fading into the void. Then, as systems slowly came back online and the blinding light began to fade, the Allied forces held their breath, uncertain of what new challenges or transformations awaited them in the aftermath of this cataclysmic event. The vast expanse of space fell silent, the echoes of the titanic explosion fading into the void. Seconds stretched into an eternity as the Allied fleet held its collective breath. Then, like a curtain being drawn back, the blinding light began to recede. As systems flickered back to life and sensors regained functionality, the battlefield slowly came into focus. The massive sphere created by the transformed stellar nexus began to contract, revealing a sight that elicited gasps of relief and awe from observers across the Allied fleet. Within its protective embrace, the majority of their forces remained intact, having weathered the cataclysmic blast that had obliterated a significant portion of the enemy armada. Where the imposing enemy command ship had once loomed, now floated a vast field of debris. Fragments of hull plating and shattered weaponry drifted aimlessly, testament to the unprecedented power unleashed by the stellar nexus. As the sphere continued to shrink, the stellar nexus itself began to revert to its original form. The ship's hull rippled and flowed, shedding its expanded configuration and coalescing back into its familiar shape. Within the vessel's command center, a profound shift was taking place. The unified entity composed of Mark, Flora, and Lyria began to separate, their merged consciousness unraveling like threads of a complex tapestry. As their individual awareness reasserted itself, their bodies, which had become intricately entwined with the ship's systems, started to disentangle. Mark felt a rush of sensations as his form began to solidify. His skin tingled, the metallic sheen dulling but not entirely fading. Beside him, Flora's bioluminescence pulsed faintly, casting soft patterns of light across the deck. Lyria's eyes, still aglow with an inner radiance, blinked rapidly as she tried to process the flood of information from her expanded senses. As the last tendrils of the ship's technology withdrew from their bodies, the trio collapsed onto the deck. Their limbs felt leaden, muscles quivering with exhaustion from the intense mental and physical strain of their transformation. Dr. Zelna and Dr. Voss burst into the chamber, their faces a mix of concern and scientific curiosity. They quickly set up mobile medical units, the devices humming to life as they began scanning the trio's vital signs. "Remarkable," Dr. Selna murmured, her antennae twitching as she studied the readouts. "Their DNA, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if their genetic structure has been completely rewritten." Dr. Voss nodded, his fingers flying over a holographic interface. "I'm detecting elements of both human and Wadi genetics. But there's something else. Something I can't quite identify. It must be related to their interaction with the Nexus's AI." As the scientists worked, Admiral Thax's voice crackled over the ship's communication system. "Stellar Nexus, report status. What's the condition of our assets?" Before anyone could respond, the ship's AI spoke, its voice resonating with a new depth and complexity. "Mark, Flora, and Lyria are stable but experiencing disorientation. Their physiological changes appear to be persistent. I am assisting in organizing the vast amount of data acquired during our merged state." On the bridge of the Acamarian's flagship, Admiral Thax nodded grimly. He turned to his communications officer. Send out a fleet-wide status request. I want damage reports from all vessels immediately. His gaze swept across the debris-strewn battlefield. And begin rounding up any surviving enemy craft. We need to secure those prisoners. As the Akamarian's warships moved to carry out their orders, a shuttle departed from King Zorn's vessel, bound for the stellar Nexus. Aboard were the Wadi monarch himself and Ambassador Chen, their faces etched with concern for their transformed allies. They arrived to find Mark, Flora, and Lyria conscious but clearly struggling. The trio sat huddled together on the deck, their eyes unfocused as they grappled with the lingering echoes of their merged consciousness. It's overwhelming, Mark managed to say, his voice hoarse. So much information, so many experiences. It's hard to separate what's mine and what isn't. Flora nodded, her luminescent skin pulsing in time with her rapid heartbeat. I can still feel the ship, the fleet. It's like we're all connected somehow. Lyria's glowing eyes darted around the room, taking in spectrums of light invisible to the others. The enemy, the Omega Concordance. We learned so much about them, but it's all jumbled together. King Zorn knelt beside them, his expression softening. Take your time. What you've done today, it's beyond anything we could have imagined. You've saved us all. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her calm demeanor. We'll need to debrief you fully, but that can wait. For now, focus on recovering your strength. We'll need you for what comes next. As if on cue, the ship's AI spoke again. I've detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of the solar system. The patterns match those observed during the initial arrival of the Omega Concordance's scout ships. The news sent a ripple of tension through the room. Admiral Thax's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. A second wave? How much time do we have? Uncertain, the AI replied, but based on current projections, I estimate no more than 72 hours before they're upon us. Ambassador Chen's eyes narrowed. We need to leverage every advantage we have. That includes... She gestured to Mark, Flora, and Lyria. Whatever it is they've become. Dr. Zelna stepped forward, her scientific mind already racing with possibilities. Admiral, with your permission, I'd like to propose the immediate construction of a specialized containment and research facility aboard the Stellar Nexus. We need to study and develop their abilities in a controlled environment. Admiral Thax's response was swift. Granted, pull whatever resources you need. I want that facility operational as quickly as possible. As the command center erupted into a flurry of activity, Mark, Flora, and Lyria exchanged glances. They could feel the weight of expectation settling on their shoulders, the fate of 3 species, perhaps the entire galaxy, hanging in the balance. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a word, his body seized. A pulsating energy field erupted from his skin, sending nearby electronic systems into a frenzy of static and garbled data. Flora and Lyria moved instinctively, their hands reaching out to touch him. The moment they made contact, the energy field stabilized, shrinking back into Mark's body. The 3 of them sat there, linked once more, as the others looked on in a mixture of awe and apprehension. Dr. Voss, his eyes wide, turned to Admiral Thax. Sir, I think we're going to need a bigger facility. As engineers and scientists from all 3 species began to swarm the stellar nexus, the ship itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. Its hull rippled subtly, new chambers and conduits forming in response to the needs of its evolving crew. In the vastness of space beyond, the energy signatures grew stronger, heralding the approach of an enemy that threatened to reshape the very fabric of galactic civilization. The battle won had been merely a prelude. The true test of the Alliance's newfound power was yet to come. The Allied forces had won a crucial battle, but the war was nowhere near the end. As the dust settled from their recent victory, the stellar nexus became a hive of activity. Engineers and scientists from all 3 species swarmed the ship, transforming its interior into a specialized containment and research facility. The vessel's hull continued to ripple and shift, adapting to the needs of its evolving crew and the unique requirements of its transformed occupants. Mark, Flora, and Lyria found themselves at the center of this whirlwind of activity, their bodies still adjusting to the profound changes wrought by their merger with the ship's AI, were a source of both fascination and concern for the research team. Dr. Zelna, her antennae twitching with excitement, guided the trio through a series of tests designed to map the extent of their new abilities. "Now, Mark," she said, gesturing to a series of holographic targets, "I want you to focus on channeling that energy we saw earlier. Try to direct it towards these markers." Mark nodded, his metallic skin gleaming under the harsh lights of the testing chamber. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the feeling of power thrumming beneath his skin. With a sharp exhalation, he extended his hand. A burst of energy erupted from his palm, slamming into the nearest target and causing it to explode in a shower of sparks. The impact of Mark's energy pulse sent a shudder through the ship. Suddenly, the artificial gravity flickered, plunging the room into momentary chaos. Dr. Zelna and her assistants floated helplessly, their equipment drifting around them. Flora reacted instinctively. Her bioluminescent skin pulsed brightly, and a shimmering field of energy expanded from her body. It enveloped the room's occupants, gently lowering them back to the deck as the gravity stabilized. "Fascinating," Dr. Voss muttered, furiously tapping notes into his datapad. "It appears their abilities are still evolving, adapting to new situations as they arise." Lyria, her glowing eyes scanning the room, nodded in agreement. "I can see the energy patterns shifting within the ship's structure. It's rewriting itself to accommodate our powers." Admiral Thax's voice crackled over the intercom. "Dr. Zelna, report. What was that disturbance?" The scientist quickly explained the situation, emphasizing the potential benefits of the ship's adaptive properties. Thax listened intently, his strategic mind already formulating plans. "I want this technology implemented across key vessels in the fleet," he ordered. "If we can create environments that enhance our new assets' abilities, it could give us a critical edge in the coming battle." As the days passed, the trio's training intensified. They learned to harness their new powers, pushing the boundaries of what they thought possible. Mark mastered the art of channeling energy through his metallic skin, while Flora's bioluminescence evolved into powerful defensive shields. Lyria's enhanced vision allowed her to perceive weaknesses in simulated enemy vessels, guiding their attacks with uncanny precision. Their progress was swift, but time was not on their side. On the 5th day of their training, alarms blared throughout the stellar Nexus. The ship's AI spoke, its voice resonating with urgency. "Long-range sensors have detected the arrival of the second Omega Concordance invasion force. They've entered the solar system." Admiral Thax's face appeared on the main view screen, his expression grim. "This is it, people. Battle stations, stellar Nexus, take point. It's time to see what our new capabilities can do." As the Allied fleet moved into formation, Mark, Flora, and Lyria took their positions in the stellar Nexus's command center. They initiated a partial merge with the ship's systems, their minds expanding to encompass the entire battlefield. The Omega Concordance struck with brutal efficiency, their ships utilizing advanced phase shift technology to bypass the outer defensive lines. Mark's eyes narrowed as he processed the tactical data streaming through his mind. "Evasive maneuvers," he called out, his voice overlapping with the ship's AI. The stellar Nexus responded instantly, weaving through the chaos with impossible grace. Flora's hands danced over her console, her skin pulsing with vibrant patterns. Energy fields sprang to life around Allied vessels, deflecting enemy fire with startling effectiveness. Lyria's glowing gaze swept across the battlefield, identifying structural weaknesses in the enemy ships. "Targeting solutions uploaded," she announced, her voice calm amidst the storm of battle. As the conflict intensified, a massive Omega Concordance vessel emerged from the depths of their formation. It pulsed with an eerie light, distorting the very fabric of space-time around it. "Temporal weapon detected," the stellar Nexus's AI warned. "Enemy vessel is generating localized time distortions." Mark felt a strange sensation ripple through his body. His metallic skin began to emit pulses of chronometric particles, counteracting the time distortions around nearby Allied ships. Admiral Thax's voice cut through the chaos. Stellar Nexus, we're detecting a vulnerability in their command structure. I'm dispatching a strike team to exploit it. Can you provide cover? Mark, Flora, and Lyria exchanged glances, their merged consciousness allowing for instantaneous communication. We're on it, Admiral, they responded in unison. As the strike team launched, the trio focused their combined abilities to create a path through the enemy's defenses. Mark's energy pulses disrupted enemy sensors. Flora's shields protected the strike force from stray fire, and Lyra's enhanced perception guided them through the shifting temporal distortions. The battle hung in the balance as the strike team closed in on their target. The fate of 3 species and perhaps the entire galaxy rested on the outcome of this daring gambit. Mission. The strike team's assault craft pierced through the enemy's defenses, hurtling towards the massive Omega Concordance vessel at the heart of their formation. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the enemy ship. The Stellar Nexus's sensors overloaded, leaving the Allied forces momentarily blind. When the light faded, the battlefield had changed dramatically. The Omega Concordance vessel was gone, along with a significant portion of their fleet. Status report. Admiral Thax's voice crackled over the comms. Enemy forces have retreated, sir, responded a tactical officer. We're detecting residual temporal energy signatures consistent with a large-scale phase shift. As the dust settled on their hard-won victory, the true cost of the battle became apparent. The Allied fleet had suffered heavy losses, and the Stellar Nexus itself had taken significant damage. Its once gleaming hull was now scarred and pitted, energy fluctuations rippling across its surface. Mark, Flora, and Lyria slumped in their command chairs, exhausted from the mental and physical strain of the battle. Their skin glistened with sweat, and their eyes were unfocused as they struggled to process the lingering sensations of their merged consciousness. We need to get them to medical immediately, Dr. Zelna said, her antennae twitching with concern as she monitored their vital signs. Admiral Thax nodded grimly. Agreed. Have them transferred to my flagship for examination, and initiate recovery procedures for the Stellar Nexus. As the trio was carefully transported to the medical bay of Thax's ship, the Stellar Nexus remained unresponsive, drifting silently in space. Salvage teams approached cautiously, attaching tractor beams to guide the damaged vessel into a secure docking bay. In the sterile confines of the flagship's medical bay, a team of experts from all 3 allied species worked tirelessly to assess the physical changes in Mark, Flora, and Lyria. Dr. Voss led the human contingent, his brow furrowed in concentration as he pored over the latest scan results. Their cellular structure continues to evolve at an accelerated rate, he reported to Admiral Thax, who stood watching from behind a protective force field. The integration of ship-based nanotechnology with their biological systems is unprecedented. As if to underscore his point, Mark's body suddenly convulsed. His metallic skin began to glow, emitting waves of chronometric particles that distorted the air around him. Nearby medical equipment creaked and groaned, its components aging rapidly under the influence of the localized temporal field. Containment breach, shouted an Acamarian scientist, her scales flaring in alarm. Dr. Selna reacted swiftly, activating emergency force fields around each of the examination tables. The chronometric particles dissipated against the shimmering barriers, but not before several pieces of medical equipment had deteriorated beyond repair. Admiral Thax's expression hardened as he watched the scene unfold. This is too dangerous, he said, turning to his chief of security. We need a specialized containment unit for them, something that can adapt to these fluctuations in their abilities. As plans for the new containment unit were hastily drawn up, activity around the Stellar Nexus intensified. Salvage teams had finally managed to bring the ship into the docking bay, but their efforts to reactivate its systems had proven fruitless. It's like the ship is in some kind of stasis, reported the lead engineer, frustration evident in his voice. None of our override codes are working. Just then, a ripple passed through the Stellar Nexus's hull. The metal seemed to flow like liquid, reshaping itself in response to the presence of nearby Allied vessels. The salvage team pulled back, alarmed by this display of apparent sentience. Fascinating, murmured Dr. Voss, who had been called to observe the phenomenon. It seemed the ship retained some level of awareness, even in its dormant state. This could be linked to its connection with Mark, Flora, and Lyria. As engineers continued their efforts to understand and reactivate the stellar nexus, King Zorn convened an emergency meeting with Ambassador Chen and Admiral Thax. The leaders gathered in a secure conference room, their faces grave as they discussed the implications of recent events. The abilities displayed by Mark, Flora, and Lyria during the battle were concerning, King Zorn began, his tail twitching nervously. We must consider the potential diplomatic repercussions of their unique bond. Ambassador Chen nodded in agreement. The power they wield could upset the balance between our species. We need to ensure that it's used for the benefit of the entire alliance. Admiral Thax leaned forward, his cybernetic eye glowing intensely. I propose we form a joint task force to study and harness these abilities. We can't afford to let this advantage slip through our fingers, not with the threat of the Omega Concordance still looming. As the leaders debated the best course of action, work on the specialized containment unit for Mark, Flora, and Lyria neared completion. The new facility, constructed on a nearby moon, was designed to adapt to their fluctuating abilities while allowing for controlled testing and observation. Dr. Ilara Voss, recognizing the unique challenges posed by the trio's evolving neural patterns, volunteered to lead the research team. Her experience with their entangled minds made her uniquely qualified to develop methods for controlling and harnessing their newfound powers. As Mark, Flora, and Lyria were carefully transported to the moon base, engineers made a breakthrough aboard the stellar nexus. They discovered that the ship's core systems had undergone significant changes, creating new chambers and pathways that seemed designed to channel and amplify the trio's unique energies. It's as if the ship has evolved beyond its original design, marveled the chief engineer. These new systems, they're like nothing we've ever seen before. The implications of this discovery sent ripples of excitement and trepidation through the Alliance. The stellar nexus, it seemed, had become more than just a ship. It was now a living extension of Mark, Flora, and Lyria's combined abilities, a powerful asset that could turn the tide in their ongoing conflict with the Omega Concordance. As night fell on the moon base, Mark, Flora, and Lyria found themselves in their new containment unit. The walls pulsed with a soft, adaptive energy field, responding to the slightest fluctuations in their abilities. Despite the comfortable surroundings, a sense of unease permeated the air. "What happens now?" Flora asked, her bioluminescent skin casting a gentle glow in the dimly lit room. Mark reached out, taking her hand in his. "I don't know," he admitted, his metallic skin cool against hers. "But whatever comes next, we face it together." Lyria's glowing eyes swept across the room, taking in spectrums of light invisible to her companions. "I sense change," she said softly. "Not just in us, but in the very fabric of space around us." As if in response to her words, a faint tremor passed through the base. In the distance, alarms began to sound, heralding the approach of a new, unknown threat. Threat. The alarms grew louder, their urgent wails echoing through the corridors of the moon base. Mark, Flora, and Lyria exchanged worried glances, their bodies tensing in anticipation. Suddenly, the trio gasped in unison, their eyes widening as a shared vision overwhelmed their senses. They saw a massive Omega Concordance mothership, its hull overflowing with weapons, entering the solar system. The vision was so vivid, so real that they could almost feel the oppressive weight of the enemy's presence. "We need to warn Admiral Thax," Mark said, his metallic skin rippling with urgency. Before they could act, Dr. Ilara Voss burst into the room, her face etched with concern. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" she asked, her eyes darting between the three of them. Flora nodded, her bioluminescent skin pulsing rapidly. "The Omega Concordance! They're here!" Dr. Voss tapped her communicator, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Admiral Thax, this is Dr. Voss. Mark, Flora, and Lyria have had a shared vision. The Omega Concordance mothership has entered the solar system." Admiral Thax's voice crackled over the comm, tense and authoritative. "Understood, Doctor. I'm ordering an immediate redeployment of the Allied fleet to defensive positions. Keep me updated on any further developments. As the Alliance prepared for the approaching threat, Dr. Voss turned her attention back to the trio. We've made a breakthrough, she announced, her voice tinged with excitement despite the looming danger. We've developed neural implants that should help you stabilize your abilities and maintain a stronger connection with the stellar nexus. Mark's eyebrows furrowed. Is it safe? Dr. Voss nodded. As safe as we can make it. We have medical teams from all 3 allied species standing by. This could be our best chance at harnessing your full potential. The implantation procedure was carried out under high security. Mark, Flora, and Lyria lay on separate operating tables, surrounded by a team of skilled surgeons and cutting-edge medical equipment. As the neural implants were carefully inserted, the trio's bodies reacted in unexpected ways. Mark's metallic skin seemed to flow and reshape itself around the implant, integrating it seamlessly. Flora's bioluminescent patterns shifted and swirled, creating new intricate designs that pulsed in sync with the implant's energy signature. Lyria's eyes glowed even brighter, her pupils dilating and contracting rapidly as her brain adjusted to the new neural interface. As they recovered from the procedure, reports came in from the engineering teams working on the stellar nexus. The ship's hull had begun to generate a crystalline growth, spreading across its surface in complex, energy-pulsing patterns. Admiral Thax, recognizing the potential of this development, ordered the creation of smaller deployable versions of these crystals. We need to extend the stellar nexus's capabilities across the fleet, he declared. Get those prototypes ready as soon as possible. Meanwhile, political tensions within the Alliance reached a boiling point. King Zorn found himself facing growing pressure from conservative factions within the Wadi nobility. Councillor Vexor, once a staunch supporter, now led a group demanding an emergency session to address concerns about the rapidly evolving human-Wadi hybrid technology. As King Zorn reluctantly agreed to convene the council, long-range sensors detected the arrival of the first wave of the new Omega Concordance invasion force. The advanced fleet began systematically disabling the outer defense systems of the solar system with terrifying efficiency. Admiral Thax's voice boomed through the command channels. Initiate Operation Nexus Shield. Deploy the Nexus nodes and prepare for engagement. Mark, Flora, and Lyria were quickly transported to a specially designed command center aboard the stellar nexus. As they interfaced with the ship's systems, their consciousness expanded, stretching across the vast network of Nexus nodes that now surrounded key Allied positions. The trio gasped as their awareness suddenly encompassed the entire battlefield. They could see every ship, every weapon, every tactical maneuver, as if they were omniscient beings observing the conflict from above. Incoming Omega Concordance vessels bearing EO-47, Mark called out, his voice overlapping with the ship's AI. Flora's hands danced over the control interface, her movements perfectly synchronized with the stellar nexus's defensive systems. Shields at maximum, deploying countermeasures. Lyria's glowing eyes darted across the tactical display. Multiple targets acquired, firing solutions uploaded to Allied vessels. As the battle intensified, the strain of maintaining the vast network began to take its toll on Mark, Flora, and Lyria. Mark's metallic skin fluctuated wildly. Flora's bioluminescence pulsed erratically, and Lyria's eyes emitted intense bursts of light that threatened to overload the ship's sensors. Dr. Voss and her medical team worked frantically to stabilize their conditions, using a combination of advanced techniques and the adaptive technology of their containment units. We need to modulate the neural interface, she shouted over the din of battle. Their synaptic patterns are becoming dangerously erratic. Suddenly, a new threat emerged on the battlefield. Massive biomechanical constructs began tearing through the Allied fleet's outer defenses, resisting conventional weapons and tactics. Admiral Thax's face appeared on the main view screen, his expression grim. We have no choice. Deploy the experimental weapon. As the weapon fired, its energy beam amplified by the network of Nexus nodes, Mark, Flora, and Lyria felt a surge of power unlike anything they had experienced before. The beam struck the largest of the enemy constructs, causing a chain reaction throughout the Omega Concordance fleet. For a moment, victory seemed within reach. But as the trio pushed their abilities to the limit, maintaining the Nexus node network, alarms blared throughout the stellar Nexus. Their life signs became increasingly erratic, their neural interfaces on the verge of overload. Dr. Voss's voice cut through the chaos. We have to sever the connection. It's killing them. As the neural link was abruptly cut, Mark, Flora, and Lyria collapsed, their bodies convulsing. The Nexus node network shut down, leaving the Allied fleet suddenly vulnerable. In the midst of this chaos, as the Omega Concordance regrouped and launched a fierce counterattack, a new energy signature appeared on the long-range sensors. A massive ship, unlike anything seen before, emerged from the depths of space. As consciousness slowly returned to Mark, Flora, and Lyria, they found themselves facing an uncertain future. The Alliance was caught between the regrouping Omega Concordance invasion fleet and this mysterious new arrival. As they struggled to recover, the trio knew that the greatest challenges still lay ahead. Ahead still lay. As Mark, Flora, and Lyria struggled to recover, the sensors aboard the Stellar Nexus suddenly lit up with new activity. A massive energy signature appeared on the long-range scanners, rapidly approaching their position. Unidentified vessel entering the system, reported the tactical officer, his voice tense. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. Admiral Thax leaned forward, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the main view screen. Put it on screen. Maximum magnification. The image that appeared left everyone on the bridge speechless. A colossal ship, easily dwarfing even the largest vessels in the Allied fleet, glided through space with an otherworldly grace. Its hull shimmered with an iridescent glow, its surface adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with life. As the mysterious vessel drew closer, it broadcast a message across all frequencies. The communications officer's hands flew over her console, decoding the transmission. Sir, they're identifying themselves as the Celestial Harmony, she said, her voice filled with awe. They claim to be from a distant future where humans, Wadi, and Akamarians have achieved perfect integration. The battle came to an abrupt halt as both the Allied forces and the Omega Concordance paused to assess this new development. In the sudden lull, Dr. Alara Voss seized the opportunity to focus on stabilizing Mark, Flora, and Lyria. Quick, adjust the neural dampeners, she ordered her team. We need to synchronize the implants with their fluctuating biorhythms. As the medical team worked feverishly, the trio's vital signs began to stabilize. Their bodies, still exhibiting signs of their extraordinary transformations, settled into a more controlled state. Slowly, their eyes fluttered open. Mark was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. What happened? Dr. Voss leaned over him, her face etched with concern and relief. You overloaded the neural network. We almost lost you. Flora sat up, her bioluminescent skin pulsing softly. The battle? Are we? There's been a development, Dr. Voss interrupted, quickly bringing them up to speed on the arrival of the Celestial Harmony. Lyria's glowing eyes widened. We need to get back to the Nexus, now. Despite Dr. Voss's protests, the trio insisted on returning to their posts. As they made their way to the Stellar Nexus's command center, Admiral Thax's voice crackled over the intercom. Attention all personnel. I'm dispatching a delegation to board the Celestial Harmony. Stand by for further instructions. The small group of representatives, scientists, and engineers approached the futuristic vessel with a mixture of trepidation and excitement. As they docked, the airlock hissed open, revealing a sight that left them stunned. The being that greeted them was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It stood tall, its body a perfect blend of human, Wadi, and Akamarian physiologies. Its skin shimmered with a metallic sheen, reminiscent of Mark's transformation, while bioluminescent patterns similar to Flora's danced across its surface. Its eyes glowed with the same intensity as Lyria's, seeming to peer into multiple dimensions at once. Welcome aboard the Celestial Harmony, the being said, its voice a harmonious blend of tones. I am Captain Genra. We've come a long way to aid you in this crucial moment. As the delegation explored the mind-boggling advancements aboard the Celestial Harmony, the temporary ceasefire came to an abrupt end. The Omega Concordance, having regrouped, launched a fierce assault on the Allied fleet. Back on the stellar Nexus, Mark, Flora, and Lyria reactivated the Nexus node network. This time, they exercised greater caution, carefully managing their energy output to prevent another overload. "Nexus nodes online," Mark announced, his metallic skin rippling with controlled energy. "Distributing power to the fleet's shields." Flora's hands danced over the control interface, her movements fluid and precise. "Coordinating defensive maneuvers. All ships, assume formation Delta 7. Lyria's glowing eyes darted across the tactical display. Multiple Omega Concordance vessels approaching from Vector 225, uploading targeting solutions to our forward elements. The battle resumed in earnest, but this time, the Allied forces found themselves bolstered by technology shared from the Celestial Harmony. A swarm of sleek, autonomous drones deployed from the futuristic ship, their movements a blur as they engaged the Omega Concordance's largest biomechanical constructs. Admiral Thax watched in amazement as the drones systematically dismantled the enemy's most formidable weapons. "By the stars," he breathed, "their predictive algorithms are light years beyond ours." Just as victory seemed within reach, the Omega Concordance unveiled its ultimate weapon. A massive device at the heart of their fleet activated, sending out waves of distorted spacetime. Allied ships caught in these temporal rifts found themselves out of sync. Their movements slowed or accelerated unpredictably. "What in the name of the ancients is happening?" King Zorn demanded, his tail lashing in agitation as he watched the chaos unfold on the main view screen. Ambassador Chen's face paled. "They've weaponized time itself." Mark, Flora, and Lyria felt the disturbance ripple through the Nexus node network. Without hesitation, they channeled their combined abilities through the stellar Nexus, attempting to stabilize the affected areas of spacetime. Bubbles of normal time flow began to form around Allied ships, offering them respite from the temporal chaos. But maintaining these bubbles while coordinating the fleet's movements pushed the trio to their limits once again. As they struggled to hold the line, the captain of the Celestial Harmony made a decision that would change the course of the battle. The futuristic ship moved into position alongside the stellar Nexus, initiating a technology transfer protocol that would rewrite the very nature of the conflict. A brilliant stream of data and energy flowed between the two vessels, causing the stellar Nexus to undergo a rapid evolution. New structures blossomed across its hull, incorporating elements of the Celestial Harmony's advanced design. The influx of future technology triggered another transformation in Mark, Flora, and Lyria. Their bodies began to emit a radiant light, their consciousness expanding beyond the confines of the ship and the Nexus node network to encompass the entire battlefield. In this heightened state of awareness, they perceived the temporal rifts as tangible things, tears in the fabric of reality that they could manipulate and mend. Working in perfect unison, they began to close the rifts, their actions creating a cascading effect that spread across the battlefield. As the last of the temporal distortions faded, the Omega Concordance's time weapons sputtered and died. The enemy fleet, suddenly vulnerable, found itself facing the full might of the Allied forces, now augmented with technology from the Celestial Harmony. Admiral Thax's voice boomed through the command channels. "All ships, this is our moment. Converge on the Omega Concordance command vessels. Let's end this threat once and for all." The Allied fleet surged forward, their weapons blazing with newfound power. But as victory drew near, a crisis unfolded aboard the stellar Nexus. The strain of manipulating spacetime had taken a severe toll on Mark, Flora, and Lyria. As the last echoes of battle faded, the trio collapsed, their bodies racked with pain. Dr. Voss and her medical team rushed to their aid, but quickly realized that traditional treatments were useless against the exotic energies now coursing through their systems. "We're losing them," Dr. Voss shouted, her hands moving frantically over her medical scanner. "Their cellular structure is breaking down faster than we can stabilize it." In that moment of desperation, a communication came through from the Celestial Harmony. Captain Genra's voice filled the medical bay, calm and resolute. "We have the technology to save them," the captain said. but it will require placing them in stasis until a cure can be developed. You must bring them to our medical bay immediately." As preparations began to transfer Mark, Flora, and Lyria to the celestial harmony, the stellar Nexus underwent yet another transformation. The ship's systems, infused with future technology and the residual energy of the trio's expanded consciousness, began to exhibit signs of sentience. Displays flickered to life without input, and the ship's AI began coordinating complex maneuvers with the rest of the fleet, mopping up the remaining Omega Concordance forces with ruthless efficiency. As Mark, Flora, and Lyria were carefully moved to the Celestial Harmony's advanced medical bay, the leaders of the Alliance gathered to discuss the implications of these extraordinary events. Admiral Thax, King Zorn, and Ambassador Chen convened in a secure conference room, their faces grave as they contemplated the rapidly changing landscape of galactic politics and power. The battle was won, but as they looked out at the aftermath of the conflict, the stellar nexus evolving beyond their understanding, the celestial harmony's presence altering the balance of power, and their greatest heroes lying in stasis, they knew that the true challenges were only just beginning. The leaders of the Alliance knew that the true challenges were only just beginning as they grappled with the extraordinary events that had unfolded. In the days that followed, as the fleet regrouped and began the process of rebuilding, King Zorn took charge of organizing a grand ceremony to honor the sacrifices made during the battle and celebrate the newfound peace. The event would serve as a symbol of unity and hope for all allied species. On the lush world of Zarxus, construction crews worked tirelessly to complete the newly designed Unity Plaza. The expansive space, adorned with flowing fountains and vibrant flora from all allied worlds, stood as a testament to the diverse coalition that had formed in the face of adversity. As the day of the ceremony arrived, ships from across the Alliance descended upon Zarxus. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Representatives from every allied species filled the plaza, their colorful attire creating a tapestry of cultures against the backdrop of the gleaming white stone structures. King Zorn, resplendent in his royal regalia, stepped onto the central dais. His tail swished with nervous energy as he surveyed the crowd. Admiral Thax and Ambassador Chen flanked him, their faces a mixture of pride and solemnity. "My friends," King Zorn began, his voice carrying across the hushed plaza, "we gather here today to—" His words were cut short by a collective gasp from the assembled crowd. Above them, the sky shimmered and parted, revealing the stellar nexus. The ship's crystalline hull pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting a soft glow over the gathering below. Before anyone could react, a massive holographic image materialized above the plaza. The shimmering forms of Mark, Flora, and Lyria appeared, their bodies intertwined in a complex dance of energy and light. "Greetings, people of the Alliance," the trio spoke in unison, their voices resonating with an otherworldly timbre. "We come to you in a form beyond the physical realm." King Zorn's eyes widened in disbelief. "Mark? Flora? Lyria? How is this possible?" The holographic figures smiled, their expressions radiating warmth and wisdom. "Our consciousness has merged with the stellar nexus," Mark explained. "We now exist on a higher plane, able to guide and protect the Alliance in ways we never imagined." Flora's bioluminescent patterns pulsed as she spoke. "We have become one with the ship, transcending the limitations of our individual forms." Lyria's glowing eyes swept across the crowd. "Together, we form a bridge between past, present, and future, dedicated to safeguarding the peace we've all fought so hard to achieve." King Zorn, quickly recovering from his initial shock, stepped forward. His voice rang out clear and strong. "Then let it be known that from this day forward, you shall be recognized as the Celestial Triad, protectors of our alliance and beacons of hope for all our peoples." The crowd erupted in cheers, the air filled with a cacophony of voices from a dozen different species. As the applause began to die down, the Celestial Triad spoke again. "We have gained abilities beyond your understanding," they said. "Allow us to demonstrate." With a gesture, a shimmering bubble of energy enveloped the plaza. Time seemed to slow within its confines, the air taking on a dreamlike quality. To the astonishment of all present, Mark stepped out of the hologram, his form solidifying into flesh and blood. With a mischievous grin reminiscent of his days as a brash diplomat, Mark strode purposefully towards Princess Lyria, who stood frozen in shock beside her father. In one fluid motion, he swept her into his arms and kissed her passionately, dipping her low as if they were the only two beings in the universe. King Zorn's face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment, his tail lashing behind him. But as he watched the genuine joy on his daughter's face, his expression softened. A chuckle escaped his lips, growing into full-blown laughter as he remembered the journey that had led them all to this moment. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Cheers and applause erupted once more, even louder than before. Species that had once been bitter enemies now stood side by side, united in celebration of this symbolic union. As the temporal bubble began to fade, Mark released Princess Lyria and stepped back. His form shimmered, becoming translucent once more. With a wink and a bow to the assembled dignitaries, he rejoined Flora and Lyria in their ethereal state above the plaza. The celestial triad raised their arms in unison, channeling energy through the stellar Nexus. The sky above Unity Plaza erupted in a dazzling display of light and color. Streams of energy wove together, forming a shimmering bridge that stretched from the stellar Nexus to the distant form of the celestial harmony. As the gathered masses marveled at the spectacle, Admiral Thax produced a document from within his uniform. In light of these extraordinary events, he announced, I propose we formalize our alliance under a new treaty, the Galactic Harmony Accord. King Zorn nodded solemnly, taking the document in his clawed hands. Let this mark the beginning of a new era for all our peoples, he declared, affixing his royal seal to the treaty. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, adding her signature to the document. With this accord, we commit ourselves to exploration, cooperation, and the pursuit of knowledge across the galaxy. As the leaders signed the treaty, the Celestial Triad's voice resonated through the plaza once more. We shall guide you on this journey, they promised. The Stellar Nexus will serve as both flagship and guardian, ready to face any challenges that may arise. With a final burst of radiant energy, the Stellar Nexus began to ascend. The Celestial Triad's form shimmered and faded, their last words echoing across Unity Plaza. We go now to watch over you all, as we step into a future of infinite possibilities. The assembled crowd watched in awe as the stellar nexus disappeared into the star-studded sky, leaving behind a sense of wonder and hope. King Zorn, standing between Admiral Thax and Ambassador Chen, raised a goblet in a toast. To the future, he said, his voice filled with emotion, and to those who sacrificed everything to bring us to this moment. As the celebration continued into the night, the leaders of the Alliance gathered to discuss the implications of the day's events. The galaxy had changed, and with it, the course of history. New challenges and adventures awaited them, guided by the watchful presence of the Celestial Triad.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.